All those who are holding tickets outside will get in as fast as they can. I'm speaking not to you, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm speaking to the crowd on the outside, who seem to be standing rather reluctant to come in, and we're going to start this very soon.
Welcome to Worthy. I'm Ben.
And I'm John.
And on this episode, we are talking about the 1971 Best Picture winner, The French Connection, starring Gene Hackman. Just want to start off by saying that me and John actually got to watch the movie together in a theater, which is the first time in a very long time, and the only time, actually no, we did get to watch one Best Picture winner together in a theater. We got to see The Godfather, but that's separate. We got to watch this one as we were doing this project, and it was for this episode, so that was just a great experience. I think that added to my excitement and my interest in wanting to talk about this more than the first time I watched the movie. And then, John, we got some really interesting news almost a week after seeing it based off of some interesting censorship over the film. So why don't you tell the audience what happened with The French Connection?
So perceptive audiences noticed that some stealth edits were made to the 1971 classic The French Connection, which is now owned by Disney after they acquired Fox, which is now 20th Century Fox. And people noticed this as it was streamed on internationally on Disney, but specifically they noticed this on the Criterion Channel. Someone had gone in and deleted 6 seconds of an exchange between our two protagonist detectives, Jimmy Popeye Doyle and Buddy Cloudy Russo, which the scene contains racial slurs, but for context, we're going to play it here so you understand what has been cut.
You dumb guinea.
How the hell did I know he had a knife?
Never trust a nigger.
He could have been white.
Never trust anyone.
And now, to kind of help us further break this down and analyze not only how big of a deal this is in terms of censorship and censoring a Best Picture winner, I found a great article by Thomas Chatterton Williams from The Atlantic who kind of helps us break this down. Quote, "Instances of such cleansing are becoming more frequent and blatant. The Roald Dahl estate unleashed hundreds of clumsy alterations to his classic work of children's literature, effacing words such as fat and ugly. These cases demonstrate a fundamental misunderstanding not only what is unjustifiably offensive of the very purpose of art. James Baldwin famously argued that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Axiomatically, a history of racism that is not preserved cannot be faced. The people and the institutions who attempt to wash away all past ugliness and condescending to audiences, society is duty-bound to remember certain ideas and experiences, attitudes, and perversions." In a documentary on the making of the project, Roy Scheider recalled that black audiences in Harlem had expressed satisfaction when Hackman uttered the now censored dialogue on the big screen. Finally, a reality they knew to exist was being acknowledged, a bittersweet confirmation of a painful existence. Today, the patronizing assumption we make to our detriment is that they wouldn't be able to handle it. So, since this is such a hot topic and such a important thing in terms of censoring and banning anything from a film, and especially a Best Picture winner that we have now landed on, it is a huge deal, and especially not only because it's owned by Disney, we kind of look at Disney as being the one who've made the changes, but Criterion, who's kind of worshipped film and cinema and has been a voice for preserving cinema, they're hosting an edited film without any sort of clarity or confirmation of why the film is edited. So through some digging, there hasn't really been an official, release from them, Criterion specifically, describing what has happened, why it's been changed. But a user wrote to Criterion and asked specifically why these changes have been made and what is this version of the film that they're currently watching and they currently have listed on their platform. And Criterion respond by saying this: "We do not censor any content presented on the Criterion Channel, though in some instances we include a content warning in the description of select films. We also frequently present films in the director's cuts and other alternate versions as their makers and licensors may require. The French Connection is a 20th Century Fox film title that we have under license from Disney, its current owners. This is the only version that has ever been available to us for streaming. The question you raise has come up when we have played the film in the past, and according to the licensor, this is a, quote, director's edit of the film. William Friedkin has not publicly commented on this director's edit, and there's no other edits made in this specific director's cut. 5 groups dedicated to cinema and its preservation similarly ignored queries on the subject, including one founded by the legendary director Martin Scorsese from the Film Foundation. So all that being said, this brings up a huge question on censorship and really the morality when it comes to editing a film, especially without any sort of explanation or any kind of reasoning. And you can see by Criterion's response here that they're basically saying, hey, don't look at us. We acquire rights to films to be able to stream, to put on our platform. Look at 20th Century Fox, or more specifically Disney. Why did they make this change? So, Ben, with that all being said, I'm curious, just right away, what are your opinions? Why do you think they cut this out, and how do you feel about it?
Makes my stomach turn a little bit. I think censorship is kind of the wrong take to some things. I think talking it out, learning about the context, learning about the film, the filmmakers, everything, and the intent to going into that moment, that decision, I think is what needs to be studied. I'm very critical of older films from the 30s and 40s. We talked a lot about Cimarron in one of our very early episodes, and how I just bashed the racism in that movie, because the intent was not to depict something accurately with the artistic idea behind it. It was for comedy. It was to hurt. It was because white people were able to do that to black filmmakers. In this instance, the filmmaker's choice, William Friedkin, was to depict reality, to create, and we have it in our notes. We're going to talk about realism within this movie and that genre of it. And he wanted to be authentic. And we both were watching a series that Friedkin did with the Academy from 7 years ago. And he talks a lot about how everything that he did was for the movie and for cinema, to being authentic to that, because it felt right within the moment. And he talks about specifically the basis of the character of Gene Hackman's character, and that he believes that cop not only wasn't a racist himself, but was putting on this act because he knew that a cop in New York City, to almost get his way sometimes, had to be this racist, obtuse, humongous figure to crack a case and get down to it. Now, I'm not condoning those behaviors, but that was the accuracy that Friedkin and the other filmmakers on the movie were trying to depict. And to censor that 6 seconds of it does nothing. What does that really do? It just takes away the authenticity, and it takes art and it ruins it in many ways. It takes art and that was meant to be real, and it puts this plastic film over it that says, nope, this is corporation, this, because clearly is Disney doing this. Is we've heard of many instances of Disney, especially on Disney Plus, reworking stuff, taking stuff that may have been slightly inappropriate out, covering it different ways. And I'm not surprised that they would have done this, but it sucks because it's not appropriate. And one of the direct things that I know I can combat that is that whenever we've been recording, maybe over the last 20 episodes, I've had the movie playing next to me as we've recorded. This is the first movie in maybe a year that I'm not watching it while we're talking about the movie, because I'm refusing to stream it on any platform it's available on, and I'm refusing to buy it from iTunes because I don't know if that's the actual film itself. I don't want to spend my money, whether it's renting or buying a copy of it, if it's going to be censored. That's not what I want as a filmmaker, as someone who appreciates film and wants to talk about it. I think this is completely wrong. I think that you have to look at literature, you have to look at films, you have to look at art that is hard, that is not meant to be casually looked at, and use that to historically context what was going on. It sucks to look back on some of the awful parts of society, but that's how you need to learn and grow from it, not to hide it, because this is hiding it. This isn't helping anybody by censoring out the 6 seconds. It's hiding art for no real reason at all, because you don't want a PR storm against you because someone might be offended by it, which they probably wouldn't be, because they would realize it's a movie from 1971. Of course it wouldn't be the woke that we know of today.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think even when you look at Friedkin's interview with the Academy from 7 years ago, held and hosted by Chris McQuarrie from the Mission Impossible fame, which was just an amazing thing to see those two incredible filmmakers together. But you can see him describe this character, and even if you want to look at it the way he does, who Ben described, this character of Popeye, this detective who's wearing this kind of coat of armor in order to protect himself and be this other character. And you can almost see that in the film when he gets broken down, and I think we can describe that more when we go through the plot. But even if you were to look at this character and be no, he is just a racist detective, but obviously the intent of this film, and I love that you brought it back to Cimarron, is not to poke fun. And like the actual script, the context of the film is not to be racist, but it's just to try to find a sense of realism, something that's so accurate to what the time was and what these characters were. So I just don't see any sort of explanation. Like I said, there's no other edit in this film to call it a director's edit. It's not like he cut down, a couple other scenes to make the pacing a little snappier. No other scene has been cut. So clearly this is such a motivated act to kind of remove this entirely, which is odd because I think there's other moments in this film as well where there's explicit language and that also could be like found offensive. It's really confusing because when you look at Disney, and this might be the separation between the countries and the different teams running Disney, where you'll see that the UK version of Disney Plus is actually hosting the original version, unedited version. So Disney is hosting it on their own platform, completely unedited, but this is the UK version, so you would need a VPN being in the United States to even watch it. Yet their version that they've licensed out for the Criterion Channel is the alternate edited version. So it's very odd even from that angle where it's like, why is this company doing one thing here domestically, completely doing something else not? It feels very targeted to the American audience, like we can't even handle it. And I think that's why I really wanted to grab from that Atlantic article, because he quotes from James Baldwin, an incredible black author who's really kind of shaped our modern lives in terms of racism and race and kind of educating your kids. I just thought it was a perfect way to describe it. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And then comparing that to the reaction that the audience has had, it's a sense of relief almost to see something so realistic, to see something that they've probably experienced, and I mean black Americans have experienced throughout their entire lives, especially living in a big city like New York where they kind of have a target on their back. So this is just such complicated kind of material, and I think we both agree that like nothing should ever be censored. It's really important. I've seen people even compare this to like book burning, which I think is a little extreme. It's not like they're trying to erase the film from history, but they're doing something in order to alternate and change what is history. So it's very disturbing. I think we both agree on that. We both wish this didn't happen. We hope that we actually get a better confirmation of what this is. How did this happen? But Ben, is there anything else you want to hit on about the censorship of the French Connection?
Yeah, actually, so you were talking, just kept using that word editing, and then it just popped in my head. This movie won for best film editing.
Yeah.
Gerald Greenberg won for best editing, and you're not going to say that his work, his editing is not good enough, that it needs to be censored, that he couldn't have made that choice himself to go back to the directors. Again, this is multiple people are part of this process, and everyone was in agreement on it. And also, just to give some more context, Friedkin had more of a documentary background. He wanted to go into this movie like a documentary. He hired documentary cinematographers to work on this movie. And again, like the sense of realism that even the editor, like, now you're going to say his work is not good. Like, it just bothers me. Like, this is where the levels that it goes down to. It's not just a simple, and it should never just be a simple, well, let's wipe it clean. Let's just wipe it clean and forget about it. That you don't forget about it. You bury the past by discussing it and learning about it, and I don't know, not commiserating. What's another word for commiserating? It's not a happy thinking about it, but you're just gathered around talking about it, and that's what's important to itself. So I think there's a lot more we get to say about this movie and 1971 in general. So, John, I got to ask that question. Is The French Connection worthy of the Best Picture Award of 1971?
The French Connection. A pair of NYPD detectives in the Narcotics Bureau stumble onto a heroin smuggling ring based in Marseille, but stopping them and capturing their leaders proves an elusive goal.
In Marseille, a police detective follows Elaine Charnay, who runs a large heroin smuggling syndicate. The policeman is murdered by Charnay's hitman, Pierre Nicoli. Charnay plans to smuggle $32 million worth of heroin into the United States by hiding it in the car of his unsuspecting friend, television personality Henry Devereaux, who is traveling to New York by ship. In New York City, detectives Jimmy Popeye Doyle and Buddy Cloudy Russo go out for drinks at the Copacabana. Popeye notices Salvatore Sal Bocca and his young wife Angie entertaining mobsters involved in narcotics. They tail the couple and establish a link between the Bocas and lawyer Joel Weinstock, a major buyer in the narcotics world. Popeye learns that a massive shipment of heroin will arrive within 2 weeks. The detectives convince their supervisor to wiretap the Bocas' phones. Popeye and Cloudy are joined by federal agents Moldering and Klein.
Devereaux's vehicle arrives in New York City. Boca is anxious to make the purchase while the Weinstock urges patience, knowing they are being surveilled. Charnay realizes he is also being tailed by Popeye and escapes on a departing subway shuttle at Grand Central Station. To shake his tail, he has Boca meet him in Washington, D.C., where Boca asks for a delay to avoid the police. Charnay is impatient and wants to conclude the deal quickly. On the flight back to New York City, Nicole offers to kill Popeye, but Charnay objects, knowing that Popeye would be replaced by another policeman. Nicole insists, however, saying they will be back in France before a replacement is assigned. Soon after, Nikolai attempts to shoot Popeye but misses. Popeye chases Nikolai, who boards an elevated train. Popeye shouts to a policeman on the train to stop Nikolai and then commands a passenger car. He gives chase, accidentally crashing into several vehicles on his way.
Realizing he's being pursued, Nikolai works his way forward through the carriages, shoots the pursuing policeman who tries to intervene, and hijacks the motorman at gunpoint. He forces him to drive straight through the next station and shoots the train conductor. The motorman passes out, and they are just about to slam into a stationary train when an emergency trackside brake engages, hurling the assassin violently to the floor. A battered Popeye arrives to see the killer descending from the platform. Nikolai sees Popeye and turns to run, but is shot dead. After a lengthy stakeout, Popeye impounds Devereaux's Lincoln. In a police garage, he and his team tear the car apart piece by piece, searching for the drugs that seemingly come up empty-handed. Then, Cloudy notes that the vehicle's shipping weight is 120 pounds over its listed manufacturer's weight, indicating that the contraband must still be in the car. Further search reveals heroin packages hidden inside the rocker panels. The police reassemble and return the car to Devereaux, who delivers it to Charnay.
Charnay drives to an old factory on Ward's Island to meet Weinstock and delivers the drugs. After Charnay has the rocker panel covers removed, Weinstock's chemist tests one of the bags and confirms its quality. Charnay removes the drugs and hides the money, concealing it inside the rocker panels of another car purchased at an auction of junk cars, which he will take back to France. Charnay and Sal drive off in the Lincoln, but hit a roadblock with a large contingent of police led by Popeye. The police chase the Lincoln back to the factory where Boca is killed during a shootout, while most of the other criminals surrender. Charnay escapes into a nearby warehouse with Popeye and Cloudy in pursuit. Popeye sees a shadowy figure in the distance and opens fire too late to heed a warning, killing Moldering. Undaunted, Popeye tells Cloudy that he will get Charnay. After reloading his gun, Popeye runs into another room and a single shot is heard. Title cards describe the fate of various characters. Weinstock was indicted, but his case was dismissed for lack of proper evidence. Angie Boca received a suspended sentence for an unspecified misdemeanor. Lou Boca, Sal's brother and accessory to the handoff, received a reduced sentence. Devereaux served 4 years in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy, and Charnay was never caught. Popeye and Cloudy were transferred out of the narcotics division and reassigned.
The French Connection was directed by William Friedkin,
Written by Ernest Tiedemann, based on a book by Robin Moore.
produced by Philip D'Antoni,
Music by Don Ellis.
cinematography by Owen Roisman,
Editing by Gerald B. Greenberg.
art direction by Ben Kazacko.
And costume design by Joseph Fretwell III.
The French Connection starred Gene Hackman as Jimmy Popeye Doyle,
Fernando Rey as Elaine Chardonnay.
Roy Scheider as Buddy Russo,
Tony Lobianco as Sal Boca.
Marcel Bazoufi as Pierre Nicolai,
Frederic de Pasquale as Henry Devereaux.
Bill Hickman as Agent Bill Moldering,
Anne Rabat as Marie Charnay.
Harold Gary as Joel Weinstock,
Arlene Farber as Angie Boca.
Eddie Egan as Captain Walt Simonson.
And Irving Abrahams as the police mechanic. Our opening description here is interesting, where it describes, it almost like jumps in. It kind of describes the opening, but I want to jump in right off the top and talk about this opening scene in the film where we're in France right away, and you're like, what is going on here? You're seeing like everyday life. You're seeing this man just, he's getting his baguette, he's doing very French things. He's stroming the streets, and then all of a sudden, boom, in an alley. He doesn't even get like a word off. He immediately just gets gunned down. And what I would say is an extremely graphic way, a way of someone getting shot that we probably haven't really seen, I would say, up until this point in terms of Best Picture winners, in a very graphic, realistic way where, boom, one shot knocks him out. You see a little bit of blood, and then the man kind of goes about his way. So, one, I just want to get your thoughts of like jumping into the film this way, seeing this like jump into this kind of interesting cinema verite style from French New Wave that we've kind of heard about, but we haven't really seen too much. Maybe hints of in Midnight Cowboy, maybe a little bit in The Heat of the Night from 1967, but it's not really until now in 1971 where we see this like very expressive realism that's drawing from French cinema. And yeah, I'm curious what you think of this opening, this kind of visceral day in the life until boom, bam, the gunshot.
So I was like just starting to think of like, have we talked about gunshot? And one that popped in my head was in Gone with the Wind when Scarlett shoots the guy right in the face, and it's like that quick cut, and it's like the red paint.
Yes.
And we talked about that. Was like, whoa, what was that? That was unexpected. And yeah, this too is like very unexpected. I guess the second time going into it, I knew like the whole setup, and I'm still we read the whole intro, we read like the whole description. It was hard for me to understand that was a detective that was like onto them. Like maybe that didn't click for me because the conversation, the dialogue is really them between Charnay and his girlfriend or his wife. And it's more like their interaction, like, oh, we're going to go to America and like how great that is. So it's really hard to see like the connection a little bit because they kind of then go right into how are we going to plot to move this heroin into the U.S. But yeah, you're right. It does definitely starts off a literal bang, which the movie kind of ends on a literal bang, and the French New Wave like realism I think plays perfectly into, well, now what are we going to see in the New York realism, and that's very much like we were saying before in the cold open that Friedkin was building this like realistic way, this documentary style of showing New York City in 1970, 71 when they were filming the movie. So I think it's a great opening, and it level sets and thematically, stylistically is a great comparison between France, Marseille, and New York City.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to kind of introduce us. I've even seen film theorists talk about how this film is almost like an example or a demonstration of how French cinema has inspired American cinema, and especially moving into the 70s where we get into these, auteur-driven, very stylized films. And I've seen people even describe this film as that demonstration almost. The French are invading, coming into the U.S. I think personally it's kind of a reach. This is a film based on a true story, based on a true crime. And it's hard to kind of make that assumption. But, that's film theory. That's what they're here for. They're here to overanalyze and make and relate to everything, to everything. But, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but I was going to say, but Friedkin does say himself how influenced he is by Jean-Luc Godard. And he used and again, going back to the Academy conversation that he had, I think he said the book came well after the fact that Godard had written this term, everything is cinema, and that he said like that was how I went into this movie, was that idea of like, again, everything is cinema. So I think there is some of that relation there. So I can definitely understand like where the idea comes from. Now, is it exactly French New Wave? No, it is not. It is a dark and gritty movie, and that's kind of the fun of it. And I kind of want to pose that to you now, because we've always talked about that analogy of like getting off the train at a grandparents, great grandparents, or parents' Hollywood. And growing up, I remember and feel like there was so much conversation about movies being too violent, movies being too over the top with the violence. And I wonder if a movie like The French Connection, I don't know if it was the doorway, but it could definitely be a catalyst for why a movie like that was so popular. And again, like we go into in 72, it's The Godfather, and then it's The Sting, and then it's The Godfather Part 2. So there starts to be this very realistic and grit added to Hollywood that I think, didn't just come out of nowhere, but it's very interesting that it would pop out like right here. So I want to get your thoughts on violence, realism, Hollywood, this is like new age Hollywood being very violent.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think this film is almost like a mixture, like it taking all these different elements. Like he's taking obviously the inspiration from the cinematography, from French New Wave. I think he drew from a film called Z, if I remember correctly. But you can see it all throughout the film, how he's kind of inspired by French New Wave in terms of the cinematography. But like you said, I don't really think of like the sense of like gritty, dirty realism when I think of French New Wave. It's almost like the opposite. It's like heightened and elevated in a way. Maybe that's because I haven't seen enough French New Wave films. I've probably seen like 3 or 4. And maybe there's some more that are more gritty and more grounded. But it almost feels like that is kind of an American sentiment, especially with the whole film being based in such a gritty, kind of gross location that is the 70s New York City. But I think you're absolutely right. It does feel like a mixture of so many different things where you have, that French New Wave, you have the American sense to it as well, and then you have the violence that we do see and continue to be explored. I think we get hints of that even in Midnight Cowboy, where we see like the violence that they have in terms of like the very up close kind of like abuse scenes where he's fighting with the man, and even in The Heat of the Night, there is some kind of violent aspects to it as well. So we're like slowly, I think, evolving in terms of these Best Picture winners, the violence that we see. I mean, you could even go as far back and look at, All Quiet on the Western Front as being like one of those pre-code era films as extremely violent. And then from that point on, we kind of lose most of that violence. It becomes more melodramas, more personal dramas, and we kind of lose that sense of even having a reason for violence. And this is the perfect example. I mean, the best thing to compare this film to is probably In the Heat of the Night, because it's about 2 cops. Here's 2 detectives. That's more of like a fish out of water story with In the Heat of the Night, a black detective from Philadelphia coming against a southern white detective. So it's a little different. The French Connection is more fueled on this partnership that these 2 detectives have. But yeah, I really think that sense of violence really comes down to the sense of realism. They wanted it to feel like a real gunshot, like a real, bang when you fall to the ground and get hit. I think the opening is a great way to explain that, where in so many of the films that we've seen so far, you would expect that the villain's pointing the gun at who is what you would expect our protagonist at this point, because it's the first couple minutes, and you would expect the protagonist to say something like, some sort of catchy, cool line, something that is like classic Hollywood cinema, but nothing. He doesn't even get a chance to say anything, and he just gets gunned down immediately. So the film is already trying to like subvert expectations when it comes to what Hollywood expects. I think that's a perfect example. But in the same way, the opening almost feels like a Bond opening, right? Where we're like following this person, there's tailing going on. You're like, oh, who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? What's happening? And then boom, you're hit on the head. No, like that person didn't even matter. That's just to like set up our villain to really show how bad he is, which reminded me a lot of Bond. And we have Bond kind of rising in the 60s, which then leads to now where we are in the early 70s. So the movie does feel like it's kind of grabbing from this and that and creating this like new style of what we kind of expect from the 70s.
Yeah, and I kind of want to maybe extrapolate that and build on that idea, because a movie that I watched almost like right after this movie when we saw it was American Gangster, Ridley Scott's American Gangster, which came out in 2007. And you're wondering, like, why am I bringing that movie up? Well, in that movie, they actually make a direct reference to what happens in the French Connection. They make reference to this big drug bust and how that kind of, like, left this whole, like, landscape of New York drug underworld open for Denzel Washington's character to step in and start creating his own heroin business. But that realism, that authenticity that I would say Scott was going for in the movie really makes that go. And so it's interesting that we bring it up and wonder, like, is this real? Is this not real? And I would say, like, the grit and what we're seeing in this movie is very real. And I thought it was interesting to see that through line exists almost 40 years later between these, when those 2 movies were made, and the subject matter they're a part of is so similar.
Yeah, it's yet so far removed probably from the style of it, right? Like I've never seen that film, but I've heard it's like extremely stylistic, but in a very different way, I imagine.
You would love, I would implore a lot of people to go to that movie, but that's a great movie, and it has a really good cop, and they're not really robbers, but that cop and robber. I thought that this movie with the French Connection, I thought there was a lot of that comic strip spy versus spy aspect to it. There's a lot of Tom and Jerry.
Definitely.
There, and literally in one scene, there is definitely a lot of hijinks going on, which I think we can talk about between Gene Hackman's character and Elaine Charnay. So I want to talk more about the movie and get into the details, but there's one more aspect that I think makes this movie really unique to us, and this conversation is where it was filmed. And it was filmed in New York City, and people are like, well, a lot of films are made in New York City. This movie was made in the neighborhood that me and John, when John was a New Yorker, it was the direct area that we were essentially living in. There is I mapped it out. 0.8 miles away from me is where one of the locations were. I'm not going to say so no one can look up where potentially that is. But 0.8 miles from me, I can walk to it right now. It took me 10 minutes. They filmed The French Connection right down the road, which is awesome. I love that this part of the city was filmed and that they dared, and again that's the size of Friedkin's balls to go into this part of Brooklyn in New York City, which was not a safe area. To go in there and make a movie, I don't care who's the star of it, that's insane that you're gonna go and do that. So John, your thoughts on this movie being almost like a whole movie for us in some ways?
It is so bizarre, especially this very specific scene, which I kind of labeled as the bar shakedown, essentially a scene where our two detectives, they're probably doing their weekly routine, which is they always hit a certain couple bars. They know that there's drugs kind of being exchanged here. They know that a lot of drug dealers hang at this bar. So they kind of just starts with them walking down the street. And a lot of this movie feels really familiar after living in Brooklyn and specifically Bushwick for 5 years. A lot of it feels familiar. The above ground subway, the walking under that above ground subway, the seedy bars all around. Some of it felt really familiar, but it wasn't until you said, do you realize where this location is? So I've gone back and rewatched it a bunch of times on YouTube. And yeah, I mean, Ben described it almost a mile away. I lived about a block from where this scene took place. I was a block away, a little bit further away from this location. But what's so interesting is that you see them walking in. You can see the subway where I used to walk and go to work every single day. It looks similar to a degree, but obviously it's very different. You have older signs from the 70s. It's not a bar anymore. In fact, what's so interesting and so bizarre, I don't know if you realize this.
This is the best part.
This is the best part. So what the location is now, it is a seedy bar in terms of the French Connection, but whenever this was established, I'm assuming probably in the last 10 years, that location now is a Popeyes. And it is a fried chicken establishment that is called Popeyes, and the craziest thing is that our character nickname is literally Popeye. What are the odds of that happening? There's no way that is connected, right? There's no way.
No, it is connected. I thought you were going to say it, but you didn't say it. The founder of Popeyes, and I found it where it's declared this. So people think that Popeyes is for Popeye the Sailor Man. It's not. He named Popeyes after Popeye Doyle. He was that much of a fan of the French Connection. I swear to God, because Popeyes was founded in 1972, a year later, and he started making the fried chicken and opening those restaurants, in Louisiana, but he named it after Popeye Doyle and not Popeye the Sailor Man.
That's insane. That means this location should be the central headquarters for Popeye's chicken. That's insane.
Right?
It's so funny because when you look at it, it's almost like a bar you wish you could kind of go to nowadays. Obviously not the drug dealers and the crime, but it's a cool CD 70 bar. Kids in Bushwick would love that kind of shit now. But now when you walk into it, it's this super clean, tiny little Popeyes that has 4 tables. There's no room. And to think that there is that much of a connection, that's so funny because my girlfriend and I were debating. She's there's no way there's any connection to this movie from the 70s from this fried chicken chain. There's just no way. They just saw it as a good location to put another Popeyes.
Alvin C. Copeland claimed he named the stories after the fictional detective Jimmy Popeye Doyle, portrayed by Gene Hackman in the 1971 film French Connection, which came out a year before the chain was founded and knocked the comic strip character. That part of it was taken from a Times article from 2008.
It's so bizarre.
That's bizarre, right?
Because, like, in what way does this character kind of inspire you to name a fast food chain?
And what's so funny, also, like, just besides, like, the smell of the Popeyes every time I now pass that stop and how I'm only going to think about that, but also the part of the movie where Popeye shoots the guy that he's chasing, I'm forgetting his name, Nikolai, in the back. I thought, when I first saw the movie, this was before I moved to the area, and I had sworn, I was like, that has to be the stop, because it looks so much like the above ground subways. It's not. It's in a southern part of Brooklyn, way different, and we can get into that when we get to the car chase. But I was convinced for so long, and then when we watched the movie a couple of weeks ago, and we were in the theater, I was like, oh my God, wait, no, that is down the street, like these other locations. It was awesome. I very much liked it, and who would have thought that a Best Picture winner, like this whole time when we were recording, like we could have known this. We could have just been sitting outside on that street in our area and recorded the podcast from there. It would have only felt right if we did it from there. I should walk there right now.
It would have been the worst quality recording ever, because that corner and area is just so insane, just filled with people. It's so funny too, because that area, like, there's been known drug busts. Like, there's still it's a known area that there's drug dealers there, and they hang around, and it feels a little seedy still. And to think that, like, 50 years ago, they were making a movie at the same exact location about it being drug-filled and just, like, disgusting. It's so funny. And now just as a beautiful orange Popeyes taking its place.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I love that you described that, because I didn't know that connection, and that really makes it so much better. But I think it's
right.
It's amazing. I love that. I think it's perfect time, though, to transfer into talking about Jimmy Doyle, or Popeye, played by Gene Hackman. And what an amazing performance. I love hearing Friedkin talk about working with him and how Hackman was like not even his third choice. He was like the last person on the list because this film was so hard.
He didn't want him.
Yeah, this film was so hard to get off the ground. Yeah,
he wanted like a reporter for like the longest time instead of an actual actor. And it's not like Gene Hackman was an unknown. He had just been nominated a couple years before in Bonnie and Clyde, so it's not like this guy was just like, came out of nowhere. We had no idea about him.
No, not at all. And you watch this film and you see like the iconic imagery, his iconic outfits, his adorable little like hat. And you can't imagine anyone else playing this character. He's like this ball of just rage and anger. And it's fascinating because I always think of Gene Hackman in The Conversation, which I've seen like 5 or 6 times. And you can see a lot of similarities in this film, especially of the tailing, the listening, the following, the tracking, all these different elements that we can kind of see in terms of the story and the plot. But in terms of the characters, Jimmy Doyle, or Popeye, is insanely different than his character in The Conversation. And it just shows his level of range. And I love when Friedkin talked about the production making this film and how he kind of got Hackman to be at that place at all times, which is like a level of just like 11 out of 10 anger, just like constantly like a pot of water ready to boil over at any point. And I love that he just kind of reminded me of like this like rabid pit bull who was just like ready to chase after anyone at all times. And I love his relationship even with his, detective, Buddy Russo, or Cloudy. It's a great like kind of relationship they have that the film doesn't go too deep into of exploring, but there's enough to like understand their history and kind of they do love each other in a weird way that detectives I think only really have. But yeah, what did you think of Gene Hackman's performance as Popeye?
So I had written down, like, when I first watched this movie, just like some notes, and I wrote, you love the fact that you're rooting for him to succeed because he is just an awful person. So I think Hackman's acting contributes at least to how I felt to his character and ultimately why he would walk away with Best Actor that year. And I still think that rings true. Like, he's a very deplorable guy. I mean, even the scene where he kind of not chases the girl, but follows the girl on the bike, and then they have sex, but it's very ambiguous as to like, how did you get her to sleep with you when you probably look and smell awful because you're on an all-night sting, and this is like it's seemingly like 6 a.m. in the city, and you're able to see like you don't know what he did. And I think that's the thing, is like you don't know who the actual Popeye is, and I think that's also kind of Friedkin's approach of like these detectives, these cops who are in narcotics, have to kind of take on a different identity, have to go be a little bit sleazier than they should, I guess, to accomplish the job. Again, I'm not condoning that behavior, but it makes for an interesting character to look at. But he's also like hilarious. I mean, the scene where, you know, he again busts that bar, you know, one of two lines, all right, Popeye's here, get your hands on your head, get off the bar and get on the wall. Just the way he says it is so like funny, like Popeye's here. And then he takes all of the drugs from the bar, puts it in a cocktail shaker, mixes it all up, and just says, anybody want a milkshake?
Yeah, you explain him perfectly. He's like this. He refuses to really let the audience in to see who this person is, you know, and if he's not distracted by the case or like consumed by it, he's drinking himself to fall asleep. You know, he like never wants to be sober in a way, and it's not because he's like a raging alcoholic. He just almost doesn't want to live with himself. He wants to like hide behind these things, hide behind the case, hide behind the alcohol, hide behind, you know, a simple sex exchange from this woman, which, yes, I thought the same thing. You know, how many times have we heard cops doing creepy things? And this is not to go against every cop that exists out there. There's plenty of wonderful and plenty of bad cops that exist. But how many times have we heard like an example of like, oh, like a woman's pulled over, but, you know, you can get out of it if you do a couple things, you know, and whether that happens or not, probably not very often if it does. But it makes you think, like, what is this person capable of? What are they hiding from us as the viewers? And what does he let us in to see, really? And it's not. Like, this film is so centered on the case. You know, from the very beginning, we're immediately thrown into the plot. These people are transporting heroin. They're trying to get it into New York City. And then it's boom. We're with Popeye. We're with his partner, Cloudy, and we're following and following. And what I love so much about this movie is that how we get into the plot is just through our characters. You know, first they set it up. They explain what's happening, the drug deal, and how it needs to get to New York. But everything from that point on is from Popeye's perspective. We're following him, and it is a great way you've explained it is a Tom and Jerry, like a prey versus, you know, predator kind of hunt, where we see these characters slowly going over and over and following each other and seeing every move that Sal makes or that Devereaux makes. You know, it creates such engaging filmmaking that like you wouldn't expect. Like, you look at this movie and it's about exactly 90 minutes. It's got a great runtime. It's really paced well. But you're watching it and you're like, why is this so good? There's almost like no actual like soundtrack. There's barely any music in the film. It's mainly just like your diegetic noises that you hear in the environment. But you're so invested. You want to know, like, is this guy actually involved in something criminal? You know, is the detective right in pursuing him, or is he completely off balance? Is he off his rocker? Like, we know he is because we see more and more about his character, and we see, like, how kind of insane he is about solving crimes. And he's, like, so obsessed with it, he's kind of lost himself in it. And, yeah, what did you think of that kind of breakdown, and what did you think of mainly following Popeye as our lead character and then following it through his eyes in this kind of cat and mouse chase?
Yeah. So I think also with how you're describing, like, watching him deteriorate and kind of not like go insane about it. Like, there's no like psychotic episodes going on with him. He's just like very involved. But we as the audience know that he's right. We know that what he's doing is justified. And I think that's what makes, again, like the edit to take out the censorship interesting. Like, we know the intent. We know that he's just trying and again, if you want to get into a whole argument about cleaning up the streets and drugs, that's a separate thing. And for 1971, cleaning up the New York City streets of drugs was very appropriate to do and was very justifiable, I think, to a widespread audience. So again, we as the audience know that he is justified, that the demands that he's asking for, that although he seems crazy, that he seems loud and brash to his coworkers, to other cops, detectives, is justified. It makes sense. His car chase scene, it has a purpose to it. And I think that's what makes the character really interesting. And again, it's not like I love the character, but he does a really great job with the performance. And one other thing I want to go back to when you talk about Friedkin and Hackman being this essentially this boiling pot of water, is that apparently Friedkin said that he would yell from behind the camera after scenes were done, essentially saying that, like, you were shit. Like, that wasn't good. I've seen better. Oh, is this what we're going to deal with today? To Hackman, to challenge him, because Hackman apparently wanted to walk off and didn't want and almost quit the movie, but he stuck around and he let that rage build. Which seems like so bizarre that like a director would even do that. I know we've seen depictions of it and we hear stories, but it seems so bizarre when you hear Friedkin talk, when you hear like want that documentary style filmmaking, for him to then recognize, oh, I gotta tell Gene Hackman you're a piece of shit today and you did awful with your acting in that scene, to keep him going for the next scene so he can do a bang out kick-ass job.
Yeah, I found that the interviews with Friedkin describing his production and describing this film in particular, he's a really young guy, and he describes how he was at sometimes during the filming like one of the youngest people on set, yet he is directing this like $1.5 million essentially like cop action film. So I imagine the pressure was probably immense on his shoulders, and he's using tactics of directing that some people might find manipulative, some might find it kind of disturbing in a way. But it's funny because he talked about using it and how other directors in the past have used it, especially when you look at like Kubrick and The Shining and Duvall's character of being kind of harassed to the point where he went out of his way to say like, I don't think that's right. I don't think this is the way we should do it. And he almost looks back at this film as being like, we didn't need to make the film this way, but at the same time, like, look at the results that we got from it. And that is so clear in Hackman's performance. He's just constantly like so ridiculously angry and tense and annoyed. And you can even see it in the car chases where he talks about Bill Hickman, who is like the main stunt driver for the chase scene, and how he did the same exact thing with him. They filmed a bunch of different footage of the driving scene, and Bill was like, well, like, how'd it come out? Is it okay? Like, what do you think? Like, do we need to change anything? And Friedkin just said, it sucks. Like, it's lame. It's boring. It's not good at all. Like, this is terrible. And that pissed off Hickman so much that he's like, get into my car right now. Like, I'm going to show you like how good of a driver I am. And he described how he went like 90 miles per hour down these like crazy Brooklyn streets. And that is like the main take that we see throughout the chase scene. So, it is like such an interesting thing seeing the behind the scenes of how directors work, and how really a director's job is not only about, creating this vision and bringing tone and making sure this whole thing is concise and understandable, but it has so much to do with the actors and the crew members and creating an environment that is best for their character and the overall production. And I think it is true that like you may look at this and be like, whoa, that is intense, but at the same time, like, look at the results that we got. Such an amazing performance from everyone in this film. It just like it does really feel so lived in and so real. I think using the term realism is so right for this film, because it does feel more real than I think any film that we've seen so far. I think you could look at like Midnight Cowboy, and you could look at In the Heat of the Night, just kind of trying to introduce us and getting us to that point of a true realistic feeling. But I don't think we've really hit it on the head until The French Connection here.
Yeah, so why don't we stick on the realistic feeling? There's a lot. There's so much that I would love to talk about with this, and I don't want to have a 3-hour podcast. But the realism aspect, what did you think of the cinematography and the block lighting, how gritty it looked? Because this movie does not jump out as stylistically and aesthetically a Best Picture winner, and again, like, I think that's why the fact that it won and the story behind it is very fascinating. It's a way out there story. It's great. It's almost an action movie. You brought up Chris McCurry talking with Friedkin. It makes very much sense that you would have a very director who's into action 20 years after this movie was made, probably took a ton of influence because this car chase is so iconic. So we keep on teasing the chase, and we will get to it. But like, I just wanted to ask about the cinematography aspect of it. Like, was it effective enough for you? Do you think they could have stylized it more, that it could have been better lighting?
No, I really loved the realism that they kind of try to represent. The big pockets of shadows, characters turning into corners, and you almost like lose them entirely. Because it's the whole point is them trying to create a very realistic lived-in New York. And I think they achieve it so well. I mean, even from the very opening scene where we have the Popeye as a bad Santa Claus, a detective undercover in a Santa outfit, which is just a hilarious way to introduce our character. It almost feels like a cliche now for cops to, like, you know, be dressed up in some uniform undercover. It's almost like this kind of added and kind of cemented this as a very detective undercover cop thing to do, is, you know, stand on the streets of New York but dress as a Santa Claus or dress as a milkman or a post office worker, you know, some random thing. And you can see it right away from that opening scene, or the opening introduction of our two detectives, is the handheld camera work. Like, it is literally just a man holding a camera, like chasing after them, but it makes you feel as if you're one of the detectives. It makes you feel as if you're, you know, the third partner who's involved in the case, and it does kind of bring you down and kind of grounds you into this world. I love the cinematography. It's beautiful at the same time as it is kind of ugly in a weird way, where it does perfectly kind of show this gritty, this dirty, kind of slimy New York. But at the same time, I mean, there's like a lot of beautiful imagery to this film. You know, obviously we get the chase scene, which is like made and put together with just impeccable editing, but I do love the sense of everything is cinema. I think my buddy Gavin and I, when we were in college, we almost tried to like lean into that, but we went so far into the point of like, God, this is like not interesting enough to make it something that is classified as cinema. But I think with enough of a driven plot, interesting characters, that you can film something in a way that is very, what I would call, simple. You know, it's not trying to be over stylistically, because that's not the point of the film. You know, it's not trying to show off these amazing camera angles. It's trying to ground you into this world and make it feel like it's lived in, and make it feel like you are along on this ride. And this film does very much feel like a ride. You're with these detectives until the very end, from the first beat of introducing this case, to the very end of kind of finishing and wrapping up the case. So what did you think? Did you think it was enough for you, or did you wish that like there was more style in the cinematography here?
I always go back and forth with, you know, a movie like this, a movie like In the Heat of the Night, where it's very realistic looking, it has all black lighting, it uses night as a big backdrop for a lot of it. So I always just go back and forth. I mean, it's not the best looking movie I've ever seen, and I think that is, and I think that's a compliment though to the movie, where that it may not be the best thing you'll ever see, but visually, but it will be one of the more gripping stories that you can be a part of. It's what, an hour and 44 minutes in runtime. So the fact that like it grips you, the story keeps you engaged the entire time. I don't think there's a scene that's fairly unnecessary in it, and it makes a really good pacing of the plot and the story. So it all makes sense. So yeah, maybe it's not the best visual looking movie, but I think that its other parts make it a really good whole. So I think there's like 3 scenes. I want to talk about the chase, them tearing apart the car, and the ending. So why don't we just talk about the car chase now? Because chronologically it would make sense to do it. Just to give a little bit of background I think we both have a lot of background info on this, but I want to go a little bit farther back, probably in the pre-production period, where the producer, Bill D'Antoni, challenged Friedkin to make a car chase that was better than the car chase in Bullet, which came out in 1968. So he's like, this iconic car chase scene that everyone loved this movie for, do a better job than that. So first you have that kind of pressure to kind of do that, a little bit of a challenge creatively. And then they didn't get the proper permits to film this, which is wild when you actually watch it. So supposedly members of the NYPD Tactical Force helped control the traffic, but most of the control was achieved by assistant directors, or probably PAs, random people like you'll see now in New York City streets. It's like, hey, you can't walk here for like a second because they're trying to shoot something. Like, can you imagine like telling traffic with like really nothing else besides like yourself? Yeah, fuck you, buddy. I'm going to drive because it's a green light. And one other thing, too, that because it was very loose and maybe not the safest of stunts, but Friedkin operated the camera himself in the car because the other camera operators were married with children, and he was not. John, I know you have a ton of other background info, so definitely lay out the car chase scene for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you mentioned Bullet, because we also have Bill Hickman, who was also the stuntman driver for Bullet. So he was right there in, let's try to achieve something that is even beyond. It's even kind of pushing beyond that film and is something that really will make this film stand out. And I think, without a doubt, this film is still regarded as one of the best car chase scenes of all time. And I think that still stands till to today. And I even went back and watched Bullet's car chase scene to really compare and see the difference. And that is a very different kind of car chase scene. It's much more akin to like maybe a James Bond than I would say this is more akin to what we would relate to like a Mission Impossible car chase. It's a lot messier. There's a lot more happening. There's a lot more, accidents all over the place. But I wanted to reference this quote that I found, which is really interesting because it involves another very iconic film director. At about the same time, Mr. Friedkin met the legendary director Howard Hawks, who warned him about making several failures in a row. In Joseph McBride's interview book, Hawks on Hawks, Hawks recounted the advice he gave to the Greenhorn director. Quote, "You're going to run out of pictures. They're not going to let you make them unless you make something that people want to see. Do something that's entertaining. People seem to like a chase scene. Make a good chase scene. Make one better than anyone's ever done." End quote. And he did that with The French Connection. I think that is a perfect way to kind of describe not only that Friedkin felt like they needed something to really kind of give this film its oomph and its kind of pack, and he even described it in that Academy interview, which is amazing. If you really love this film, you should really go check out the Academy interview with Chris McQuarrie hosting. And he described how, the film could be a lot different. It could have went down in history a lot differently if it weren't for this chase scene. And he felt like they needed something else. Otherwise, this film was just going to be a constant, like, Tom and Jerry episode, this cat and mouse of just following each other. And it's like, who wants to watch that if there's no like big for grand conclusion to it? And I think you could argue that maybe even a negative to it, which we'll get to, is the ending. To me, it is almost a negative because we get the highs of the car chase scene, which becomes really the highlight and the climax for me for the film. So in terms of the actual film, I mean, it's beautiful. In terms of the chase scene, I mean, it's beautiful. I love how visceral it is, how engaging it is, and Friedkin even described how it wasn't really written out in detail in the script. It basically described that there was a chase scene, and they broke down the individual shots, but even the construction felt so loose and new wave cinema, where you described, he himself, the director, is holding a camera shooting our main stunt driver as we go down the street, and that ended up being the iconic take for most of it, the attached low angle on the car. And yeah, before I go into references to the Batman, which I would love to talk about, because one of our favorite movies of last year, the Batman, and there's just so many connections and ties to this film that after seeing this, I'm like, wow, the Batman, it's one of those things where you get educated as like cinema viewer over time, where you're like, oh, that's connected to this, that's a reference to this, that's, you start to like understand more connections throughout cinema history. And this is one of those where I'm like, wow, this movie is almost just like the same movie in a way. Like there's so many connections to the Batman from The French Connection. But before we go down that road, I'm curious, is anything else about this amazing chase scene? I mean, really for me, what jumps out is the iconic moment of the baby in the baby carriage. And Friedkin talked about how that was basically the only actor that involved in this whole car chase. The rest was not, made. It was completely made without any sort of permits, which I also want to talk about. But yeah, tell me your opinions on this chase scene. Is it your favorite car chase scene of all time?
Yeah, it's definitely it's a loud and it's a lot of fun car chase scene. There's no music to it, and one of my favorite things about it, again, Friedkin's interview, he talks about Don Ellis, who composed the score for the movie, and I don't know if many people know who Don Ellis is. He's a jazz musician who's just great. And there's not much score to this movie, but what is there really works. So I would just wonder like what that would have looked like. But then also the weird other music connection to this is that, so Friedkin said that he used Santana's cover of Peter Green's song Black Magic Woman that Santana did to help with editing the chase scene. The song doesn't appear in the movie, and I kind of want to do this where I want to take Black Magic Woman and play that with the chase scene, because I can kind of see the like build up the and how that would like how that kind of build up would work really well with the moments, because as he's getting faster and faster and chasing the and almost on its tail, you can feel that build up. And then also the beginning, the like the long kind of like droney parts that Santana brings out in that song, I feel like kind of works again perfectly with like this beginning of like, please stop, and like gotta get going, and like driving off. I think kind of fits perfectly with that song. So it's interesting to read that note. And the last thing I want to say about this, and this is just a personal aside, when I first watched this movie, it was during, as I've said before many times, during quarantine and COVID. And it might have been, I guess, around like maybe May or June of 2020 when I was watching it. But I was watching it in my room, and I was living at home at the time. And I guess it might have just been too loud where my dad was like, oh, what are you watching? I can hear it. It sounded like The French Connection. And I go, it is The French Connection. And the only things that he was hearing were crashes and loud car noises. And I think that, and I think that really, and when we watched in the theater, it's that, how great and grand that is. It's just like the car chasing, it's Gene Hackman, get out of the way, and just going for it. It was really cool. And now that you said the Batman, and now that I'm hearing this analogy, you are right. It is the same exact movie. So go ahead. I can't wait to hear this one.
It is so similar, and I think it really comes down especially to the car chase scene. I think there's so much that has kind of been ripped out of the Batmobile chase scene that we have in the Batman, even down to like the expressive close-ups of Batman's eyes as he's like opening and kind of like opening his eyes as wide as he possibly can, and avoiding things, avoiding accidents. And it's almost like the Batman has tried to level up and take it up a level, and integrate new modern special effects, integrate like the crazy rain and the crazy accidents that you see that they couldn't do back then, especially without getting really any permits or anything like that. So not only do we have like not scene for scene, but complete elements that are totally ripped from The French Connection. I mean, even you see Hackman's character like screaming at certain points in his car, and there's literally the same exact shot of Batman just like screaming as he's driving in this crazy chase scene. It's completely almost one-to-one. Obviously, we have the relationship that he has with Gordon, the good cop, bad cop. There's a direct scene where, Popeye is interviewing someone, or really interrogating someone who's just an undercover cop. He knows that the only way for this undercover cop to get out of this and to really look like he's not an undercover cop is for Popeye to give him a punch. So he's looked at as a criminal. And what happens in the Batman? That exact thing happens in the Batman, with the Batman punching Gordon in order to escape and get out. So there's some things that are like direct references that are flipped on its head. We're messing around with other references to The French Connection. And we also have certain things like, obviously, the standard good cop, bad cop, the interviewing techniques that they have on the Penguin, where you have the Batman, as the bad cop, Gordon, who's kind of being more on the light side, trying to get the information out of him. So there's just so many references throughout this to the Batman. We both loved that film so much that I had to bring it up.
Yeah, and you didn't mention, I thought you were, and that's the low-angle shot from the car.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
French Connection, that's like kind of the primary shot they use for a lot of the scene, which was pretty effective. But in the Batman, they use it, and it's intersplit with a bunch of cuts. But that low angle shot is from the left side bumper and going right to it. It's like an exact ripoff. And I think that's a great connection. And we've talked about before, I think obviously off the mic, about the Batman, but that movie at times felt like this French neo-noir, new wave type of movie. And we're talking about a movie and wondering, is this French New Wave?
It is. It's so fascinating how much it's ripped from it. And that brings up such a big question of like, is that okay? Is that wrong? And it's like, yeah, because that is what cinema is at this point. It's hard to make anything original. I mean, before we started recording, we were talking about meta-modernism and talking about just kind of where cinema is at in terms of overall looking at it as a piece of art and seeing how much we've changed. And we're at the point where we're just like, everything's just new technology. Like, we have these story beats, we know these characters, like we can't really like go so far out of the way of making something really that different unless it's utilizing our new technology that can kind of push us to Pandora with Avatar, or push us to getting a lived in Gotham that feels real, that feels gritty like The French Connection does, but it's elevated, it's heightened because it's a made up city that is supposed to be more fantastical and supposed to be kind of more out there. And there's such a long history of creators loving The French Connection. I think it's inspired so many films, like a lot of these iconic films of the 70s that we're going to hit on. But I think you can even look at a really close connection with the Safdie brothers, who Benny Safdie has kind of directly referenced and said this is one of his top 5 favorite films of all time. And not only from their depiction of New York City, the gritty realism, the handheld cinematography, this very kind of like 70s aesthetic that they've taken and kind of pumped neon into and made it a more modern take, but even down to their characters. I think you can even look at Popeye's connection to Adam Sandler's character in Uncut Gems, this guy that you find kind of lovable, but he's kind of a scumbag. You kind of can look at it both ways, where you love this protagonist but also hate him in a way.
Yeah, we're talking about chases as well as Good Time. The entire movie is about Chase showing this different version of New York City, an underground, not a more urban projects-looking area, and that's where a bulk of the movie takes place as well. So
yeah.
It's very, I think it's great, and there's a lot of filmmakers who have directly talked about this movie. Akira Kurosawa says it's one of his favorite movies. David Fincher cited The French Connection as one of the 5 movies that had a profound impact on his life, and it served as an influence for the cinematography of Seven. And Brad Pitt, who's also admired the film, cited that was one of the main reasons why he chose to be in Seven, was because of the French connection. Spielberg as well has said that he studied the French Connection to prepare for Munich, his movie, which is a thriller, not really a detective, but just there's a lot of spy stuff going on in that movie. So I can see Spielberg being like, well, what's some of the better like spy movies, like stakeout kind of movies, and French Connection probably has to be up there.
Yeah.
So
absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think the last aspect of the car chase that we should talk about is the ending of it and him shooting the guy in the back.
Which is such a... I just love how he is like so tired and dead himself at that point. Like he can barely even stand before he can barely even get a word out of his mouth,
Yeah, he can barely get a word out of his mouth, and he fires the gun, shoots the guy in the back, and there's some police officers who weren't necessarily happy about that. They're like, well, a cop would never shoot somebody in the back. But again, Friedkin was very like, no, this is what that character would have done. This is what he did.
It makes sense. I mean, he's someone who, especially after that whole situation, I mean, how much property damage did Popeye do along that chase scene? I mean, I love
the police will take care of it.
The banging up against things. He just keeps going and going and going. And he is probably like has a couple broken bones, He's probably exhausted. He's also been running in between the car chase, after the car chase. There's so much going on. And it's crazy to me that iconic image of him being shot, the expressive hands back, mouth open wide, has become like an iconic image from this film. So much that it's even used in the advertising. It makes me think of like, how crazy of a spoiler is that? This is like over an hour into the movie. We have one of our main villains, the main henchman, who is up in this point chasing after our protagonist and almost kills him before the car chase scene. Yet you show in public advertisements him being murdered. It's kind of wild. It's something that I don't think we've really seen before. Maybe it kind of pushes the envelope. It tells the audience this is not what you'll expect. This is violent. This is visceral. What do you think of that? I always found that so interesting because it is such an iconic image used from this movie that it's like, why would they do that? Why would they show this aspect, this very key, important moment of the film?
Yeah, and on the poster you're talking about, it even says Doyle is bad news, but a good cop. It's it's a huge spoiler. Like it's pretty surprising that they would do that, but it's an effective image, and I think it allows people to be like, "Oh, what's this?
What the hell?
Why?
Is that?
He's a good cop, but bad news, and is the bad news that he is a murderer, that he's shooting people? Like, is he French himself? Is this what the French do? Like, I don't know."
It's one of those images that almost feels like it's moving, even though it's static. Like, you can feel like the moving imagery of it, whether it's the gunshot, him falling down the stairs. It's like a moment caught in time that is going to be visceral, and it's going to like represent something terrible, and that his body's going to fall down. There's going to be probably blood. It is very intriguing as like a viewer of just the poster itself. And I know we've been talking so much, but before we go off of the chase scene, I just had to talk about the little bit of a story that Friedkin gives in that Academy podcast or the Academy interview, where he talks about, there's no permits for this film. There was one permit and permission granted for this film, and it was this chase scene. And you would probably think, oh, it's the, blocking the streets, blocking it all off. Nope, it's not the street. It is the use of the train, being able to shoot on the metro and being able to show it almost crashing and speeding to a break with the emergency, or speeding to a stop with the emergency brakes. And the story he tells is just amazing. I think it perfectly summarizes 70s filmmaking, this guerrilla style, this grab a camera and run. We'll see what happens, and we'll, make it in the edit. And Friedkin describes this amazing story where him and his location manager went and spoke to this person who was in charge of either the wing, this district of the metro. He was in charge of basically allowing them to be able to shoot on the metro. So they go, they ask him, the guy says, we've never done this. A metro has never been taken over by a terrorist. There's never been an accident like this on the metro. All of this is very unrealistic. Plus, how would we ever get this done? I'm definitely going to be fired if I allow this. So they say, okay, we'll have to change it. We'll have to do something else. And they're about to leave his office until, of course, money solves everything. The metro employee says, wait, maybe there's something we can do. You can give me $40,000 and one-way ticket to fly to Jamaica. And of course, being able to offer this location and secure the metro location, they agree to it. But before they agree, Friedkin has to know why the one-way ticket to Jamaica. And the MTA employee explains, well, obviously, this is insane. I'm going to get fired from this entire thing as soon as I give you guys permission and this is all done. There's no way they're going to let me have this job. So I'm retiring with that $40,000 and taking it to Jamaica with a one-way ticket and living the rest of my life. And Friedkin just describes this as, we've never seen him since. He lives in Jamaica now and he's probably dead, because I imagine that this is a 50-year-old man who's just ready to end his life just because he's so tired of working, right? So just to get this ticket and ride off, it's incredible. It's such an amazing story,
Man, is that all it takes to convince an MTA employee to let me drive the subway?
Well, think about it. I mean, $40,000 in 1971.
Yeah.
That's probably 150 off the top of my head if I had to guess. It's probably around that. Maybe even 200,000.
Especially for somebody who might, was probably living, a poor state of life, and was going to use that to live in Jamaica. Probably made it worth and last a long time.
Just beautiful. It's the kind of storytelling you would never hear, and Friedkin even describes that himself. You would never make a movie like this, nor would I even make a movie like this today. It's insane the way they kind of made this movie with just grabbing cameras and running on the streets, basically.
It's awesome. It's an awesome scene, and I love how well documented it is. And I would implore our listeners to watch maybe just that scene if you don't want to watch the movie. But let's move on. I think there are just two more scenes I really want to talk about briefly. The first one is when they are tearing apart the car. I thought that was such a great scene because you're very tense. You're like, what are they going to find? How are they going to find it? Where's it going to be? It's a little satisfying too to watch a car get taken apart like that. I don't know. There's some weird, it's oddly satisfying thing about it.
So satisfying.
It was, and then I love the interactions when they can't find it, when they're like, what the hell? And you as the audience, you're just like, where the hell did they put it? Because we know it's there. We know that they've been right this entire time, and we're just like, where's the heroin, man? And so I love this dialogue of when they start to realize it. So Buddy is going, what was the weight of the car when you got it, Irv? Irv goes, 4,795 pounds, 4,795 pounds. You sure? And Irv goes again, that's what it was, 4,795 pounds when it came to the shop. And Buddy Russo says, but the owner manual says 4,675. That's 120 pounds overweight. And when it was booked in Marseille, it was 4,795. That's still 120 pounds overweight. Jimmy's got to be right. Talking about Popeye. And Irv is just listening, is being a little defensive. And he goes, listen, I ripped everything out of there except the rocker panels, which Popeye just goes, "Come on, Irv, what the hell is this? Like, what are we doing?" The one thing you didn't want to check that you didn't check was the rocker panel. And so I love just that scene and that moment for Gene Hackman and Roy Scheider. And apparently the guy who played Irv was an actual police mechanic. And just again about like the area that we were in, I was Ubering somewhere a couple weeks ago, and I'm pretty sure I passed what is the NYPD's mechanic shop for the entire city in near our area, because there's a huge lot of space. There had to have been 1,000 police cars there, and there are just bays upon bays of mechanics working on cars. I'm like, this has to be where the police go to get cars fixed, look at cars, strip it down like this. So I just love this scene. I love the interactions and how tense it is that you're just waiting for them to find the drugs, and then you're like, hell yeah, they got the drugs. They can keep this going. So what did you think of that scene?
It's such a great highlight of like how comedy works in this film, where it's so tense, and then they just like break it with comedy. And I think that's why Gene Hackman has such an amazing career, is he can be so intense, angry. He can play the villain, but he can also play this like sweet, endearing man that you can like laugh at, and he's really great at comedy. And he you can already see that here. You know, he's balancing it so well, where with that anger and that ferocity of what the heck is that? Like, it's so freaking funny. Because, yeah, of course, it's the last thing you check. It's always that way. You know, it's always the very last thing that you would ever kind of think of, right? And I love that it's not only the police mechanic, it's the police mechanic who was involved with the actual crime that this film is based off of. So, again, it's like, not only is he trying to create this realism in the sound design and the cinematography, the look of the film, he's bringing these real life people in. He's not an actor. He's the person who's involved with this crime as much as the detectives were. And wow, like what an amazing little performance from that guy who's not an actor, has no experience. It feels so authentic and lived in, and just adds to the overall realism. And I love at the same time we have the Frenchman being like, where's our car? Like, what is taking so long? It's impounded. So you have like the humor of that, because we as the audience know they're just being strong-armed, and they're just so dumb they don't even realize it. They think that they're just like completely getting away with this crime. So it's amazing. And it comes back not only to the great realism that they kind of evoked from this film, but it also goes to what we haven't talked about. You know, before we heard about the controversies, the censorship, our opening for the podcast was going to be about either maybe like locations, or specifically I really wanted to talk about vehicles as a character. And I think this film is like the perfect representation of that. We have this Lincoln that is like the target. We see it from its very inception, from France, travel to the boat, you know, removed from the boat. We see it almost as this character, this object that they're trying to get, that they're trying to kind of strip down and figure out where are the drugs, where's the money, you know, where's the connection. Plus, we also have Popeye's car. You know, I forget the specific make and model of the car, but it is such an important, you know, character throughout this. At points where he's like sleeping in the car, he's constantly in the car, he's constantly just sitting there, he's eating food in the car. Like it's his home in a way. He spends more time in his car than he does in his apartment in this film. And then of course the iconic chase scene, which is about vehicles and the car that he steals. You know, there's a lot to this that kind of identifies these characters in their cars, that they become vehicles in themselves, and they become characters of themselves, and they're so iconic. The imagery of these cars in this film have kind of stood the test of time, and you think just as much as you think of Popeye, you think of that Lincoln, you know, that breaking down of the Lincoln, trying to discover its secrets. I love it. It's amazing. It's such a great way to kind of incorporate the surrounding, the objects, and make it more than just an object.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I love the car. The car parts of this are great, and especially when they're being stripped away, and just that whole scene. And it feels like that character is present there, as if like it's a guy who's like refusing to give up. He's like, I'm never going to give in. You'll never find the drugs. You'll never find it on me. We found it on you. And to give just a quick shout out, Irving Abrahams, who was Irv, being the police mechanic in that scene, did a great job balancing that. So, John, I just want to wrap it all up, our discussion on the French Connection, which I was very much looking forward to. This whole year, I'm very much looking forward to. This might very well be a 3-hour podcast. Let's talk about the ending of this movie. I said that it ends on a literal bang, which is true. So basically the movie ends where they bust everyone at this drug deal. They're trying to find the guys. They round everybody up, and Popeye is looking for Charnay, and he can't find him, and he shoots. What are we supposed to think, that he knows that he shoots, that he's trying to shoot Charnay, but he accidentally shoots Moldering, one of the fellow detectives that's been on the case. It's a little ambiguous, and it leads to the ambiguous ending where they just go off around the corner, it goes to black, and then reveals title cards about the fate of everybody, and then ends with that sound, that noise of a bang within the movie. So what'd you think of that ending? How it just ends. Like, we don't really get to see we got him, because I guess they really didn't, but they sort of did in this ending of this movie.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. They did, but they didn't. The main criminal got away, but they kind of pinned the other ones, but they also got away on light crimes, and they didn't serve much time for such an insane drug deal that was happening in the city based on a true story, which is even more crazy that this is all real, and there's some actual realism to it, and all ties back into why they probably made it so real and feel so grounded. But the ending is interesting. It is kind of one of the biggest negatives that I feel about this film. That I've said it before, obviously it's not just Hackman is why I feel this way, but this film is very similar to The Conversation in terms of the cat and mouse, the constantly listening, but instead of it being about detectives and more of a kind of thriller chasing scenes, more of a action kind of police drama, The Conversation is more of a psychological drama. It's like Coppola watched that, he saw the amazing performance with Hackman, and he's like, how do we amplify that? How do we really drive this character to the end of its wits? And how do we make it more psychological and torturing? And that is, I think, what this ending is lacking a bit. We get a sense of he's going to keep chasing. He'll shoot at anyone randomly. He'll shoot at the dark if he thinks he can get them because he's that close. Like, he's so angry that we've gotten this close and we can't even get it. But that's also a lot of me projecting. We kind of get that. We get that from this scene, but it's not enough for me. I wish we got some more with, Cloudy and Popeye, how they continue, how they adjust to their new life. Maybe we get a scene that's, they're at their new department and they're just not satisfied. It's not the same thrill. It's not the same level of chase. Maybe they kind of wish that they went and actually finally caught him. Maybe it still hangs on their shoulders. And maybe that's me projecting because I love The Conversation so much, but to me, the ending lacks a little bit. It is just as visceral as the rest of the film, but I wanted a little bit more than just these title cards. I just wanted something more from our characters and just something that was more concrete of an ending. And it's not just they needed to catch the bad guy. It's fine if they tell the story the way it actually happened. I just wanted something more from our protagonists more than anything. But what did you think? Did you think this was enough of an ending? Did you wish there was more like I did?
Yeah, I think that's my biggest gripe with it, is that just ends, and I wanted more. I wanted to see some more resolution, and the title cards were an interesting choice. It still didn't give me enough of okay, I understand why maybe they got off, or why. I guess that would have required a whole other movie. So I don't know, but then again, at the same time, freaking all he had to do was just do a shot where they're all outside arresting people, and then show another shot of Charnay able to escape, and it's just okay, he got away, but we're able to still see Popeye get a little bit of the retribution of that, okay, we got him, but maybe he wasn't satisfied. And then for them to be kicked off the narcotics team, it's well, why? Why were they kicked off narcotics at the end of the day? Because didn't they accomplish what they tried to do? Or is it the fact that he shot another cop, whether it's by accident or not? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I think it's that ambiguous nature that we have with cops where they can do something really terrible, but at the same time, maybe even the same day, they can do something that's grand and heroic. And something that's so violent and disturbing, like killing one of your own men, in a way, the ending also hints at that. It's no. We'll wipe it under the rug. Everything's going to go about, and we'll change you to a new department, and that's okay. You'll just keep being a cop. Just don't worry about it. It'll all settle down eventually. Don't worry about it. But, if we're not getting enough from this film and its ending, that's why in 1975 they made The French Connection 2, baby. I haven't seen that yet, though. I'm sure you haven't seen that either.
The FCU, the French Connection universe. I think that we've kind of hit the nail on the head with French Connection, and it's been a lot of fun talking about it, but let's talk about the 44th Academy Awards.
Now, a special program in living color on NBC.
Live, the 44th Annual Academy Awards presentation. This is the plaza of the Music Center in Los Angeles, California, which tonight is a suburb of Hollywood. Since early morning, crowds have gathered to watch the stars who arrived earlier for tonight's ceremony. Like Peter Finch, nominee in Best Actor category for Sunday Bloody Sunday. His lovely Anne Margaret, Best Actress nominee for her role in Carnal Knowledge. And there's Ben Johnson, Best Supporting Actor nominee for The Last Picture Show. One of the most beautiful actresses in Hollywood, Jennifer O'Neill. There's Gene Hackman, star of The French Connection, and a nominee. There's the lovely Betty Grable, who has thrilled audiences for years. James Caan from The Godfather. Jane Powell and Dick Haymes. Walter Matthau, also a nominee for Kutch. Helen Hayes, First Lady of the American Theater, and Jeff Bridges, another nominee. There's Richard Jekyll. And Isaac Hayes nominated for Best Song from the motion picture Shaft. The 44th Annual Academy Award Show is brought to you by Chevrolet, building a better way to see the USA. Jell-O Soft Swirl, the new dessert that lets you treat your family like company. And the Shell Oil Company. Shell products perform.
Every year of the Academy Awards is an anniversary. This evening, in addition, we're throwing a birthday party. Forgive us if it's a bit premature. Actually, it will be 6 more days before Charlie Chaplin is 83. With esteem and affection, with many smiles, and not without a few tears, we welcome him home. Tonight, he will receive our only honorary award. But there are other awards we've been waiting a year for, and we won't have to wait much longer. It's a delight to present our tour conductor for the early travels of the evening, a 2-time Oscar winner as a Lady of the Pavements in The Sin of Madeleine Claudet, and the high-flying stowaway in Airport, Miss Helen Hayes.
As George C. Scott didn't get around to saying last year, thank you for that reception. I'm very pleased to return to California for this very auspicious occasion and to join with my friends who will be presenting the awards tonight. Gratifying as that role is, let me tell you that whoever was the first to say, "'Tis better to give than to receive," obviously never was up for an Oscar. Let me try to explain to you how we pick our winners. And I hope I do it right, because if I don't, I'm apt to get the Academy in trouble. We'll be investigated or something. Who votes for the Academy Awards of Merit? Who nominates them? Well, here's the answer. Now, first of all eligible Academy members are asked to vote for nominations for the Best Picture of the year. And then all the other nominations are done by Academy branches, specialists in their fields. Actors vote for actors, and film editors vote for film editors. And then finally, all Academy members are asked to vote by sealed ballot for the Academy Award of Merit, all of them. And those ballots they send to the special independent accountants of the Academy, Price Waterhouse and Company, for tabulation. Price Waterhouse and Company are the only people who know the results. And tonight, some representatives of that firm will be carrying the sealed envelopes which have inside the names of the winners, and will give them to the presenters. So I got it out. Try to remember that sometime.
The 44th Academy Awards were held on April 10th, 1972 at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles, California, and the hosts consisted of Helen Hayes, Alan King, Sammy Davis Jr., and Jack Lemmon. This was the first time in which the nominees were shown in superimposed pictures while the categories were announced. So, Ben, right off the top, we have such an iconic aspect of the Academy Awards. Not only are we so used to seeing clips, but to think of not even seeing like images of our performers as like the categories are going and being announced, it's a little odd. But now we finally see it's kind of embraced to what we expect from the modern Academy Awards. I'm sure there's not too much to say, but it's kind of exciting to see us kind of slowly continue to develop the show that we're used to today.
Yeah, it shows the development of technology with broadcast TV, and also the failure of the modern Oscars to not show clips and everything during their ceremony. I digress. This is like the pinnacle of like, this is what the Oscars should be. Like, why are we so afraid of this? Like, what's wrong with this? I mean, I understand the people attending it is like the issue, but still adapting it to be like this, I think, is what we need. But anyways, honorary Academy Awards that year, there was one given out, and that was given to Charlie Chaplin. I received an honorary award at the ceremony for the incalculable effect he has had in making motion pictures the art form of the century. This is Chaplin's first Academy Award. Chaplin's first Academy Award came all the way back in 1929 for The Circus, and he's been nominated an additional 3 times. His last film, Limelight, would win the following year for the next ceremony for Best Music Original Dramatic Score. When introduced to the audience, Chaplin received a 12-minute standing ovation, which was the longest in Academy Awards history. The Oscars has part of the ovation and the award being given out. The problem is they edited it themselves when they released it on YouTube, and I can't find a 12-minute ovation clip. Now, I don't know how the broadcast handled that. I don't know if they cut away from it in the middle of it, went to a commercial break, and we're like, oh, we'll just come back when it's over. But 12 minutes of standing ovation is a very long time. But the clip itself and the parts you do get to see that they do have available is quite moving. And it's just Chaplin just in awe, in almost disbelief of like how, you know, it's this older man. How did this happen? Almost like what is this? Like, I did not expect this kind of adoration, and it made me tear up watching him just beside himself. But John, what do you think of watching Chaplin get this ovation?
Yeah, it's really stunning. I mean, he's 83 years old at this point in time. You know, he only dies 5 years after this, so it is really the kind of like climax and conclusion to his career, and being honored this way. And I think he is as emotional as he was, because I believe during like the 60s, late 60s, and into this period of time, he ran into a lot of trouble. He was involved in like a court case, and it became very public. I think some people even looked at it as one of like the messiest kind of court cases for a public actor at the time. And he was kind of shunned from Hollywood for a long time. It's why I think even Limelight took so long to be fully released. I'm not a Chaplin expert. I would love to read his book and go back and watch the Chaplin film. But it is amazing that we finally get to see him really get credited for establishing cinema. And I love that quote of, he's being awarded because he has kind of defined what cinema is, what comedy is in cinema, what it means to tell a story without any sort of dialogue even. What an incredible filmmaker, and just amazing that he finally got his due, and we finally get to honor him in the way that he kind of deserves so many years later after his first Oscar.
Yeah, and if you recall back to that first Oscar, it was not actually a competitive Oscar. They gave him an honorary award at the first ceremony for The Circus because, and I think we even said it's almost just like, well, if we did nominate you, we'd have to pick you type of thing. And it was more, it felt like, well, this is a recognition that you are quite clearly like at the top of your game and doing this, but we've also talked about how the Oscars were not necessarily made to celebrate intentionally. It was more to keep unions together, keep the whole industry together. So there's a lot of reasons why he didn't get an Oscar, like a competitive Oscar, but this is a great clip, and it truly shows the importance that of his impact and what he meant for Hollywood. So great moment, great Oscar moment. Very happy that we get to talk about it. But John, take us away to the Oscars themselves from this year.
Best special visual effects went to Bedknobs and Broomsticks from Danny Lee, Eustace Lysett, and Alan Maley. Bedknobs and Broomsticks is about an apprentice witch, 3 kids, and a cynical magician con man searching for the missing component to a magical spell to be used in the defense of Britain in World War II. Ben, do you have any connection to Bedknobs and Broomsticks? Have you ever seen this movie? Did you watch it as a kid?
No, did you?
Wow, really? Okay, this was like a huge movie growing up. In fact, like this, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, like those two, obviously Mary Poppins, we get some other Disney classic films. Bedknobs and Broomsticks was like a huge film for me growing up. We used to watch it all the time. We used to like love seeing it. Is an insane movie. If anyone wants to take some psychedelics and watch a crazy film that mixes live action with animation, it is a trip. It is such a fun ride, and it's so goofy and ridiculous. Next time we're together, Ben, we'll just have a great night watching that movie. It is so goofy.
Yeah. I'm like, look at the images. I'm like, what the hell? I've never seen these images before. But I think maybe because my childhood was filmed with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and another movie that we will definitely talk about in a couple minutes. Best film editing went to The French Connection to Gerald B. Greenberg. This is Greenberg's first nomination and win, but he would go on to be nominated for Apocalypse Now and Kramer vs. Kramer. In 1963, Gerald Greenberg began his career as an assistant to D.D. Allen on the film America, America, which was directed by Elia Kazan. D.D. Allen has been called, the most important film editor in the most explosive era of American film. She helped develop the careers of several editors known as Dee Boys, and Greenberg was the first. In the 80s, D.D. Allen would struggle with the advancement in technology and fell behind the curve due to the rise of digital editing software. Greenberg convinced Allen to go back to school to learn NLE software, non-linear editing software on computers, and the mentorship roles reversed as Allen then shadowed Greenberg on editing a feature digitally. That is awesome to see that, and to know that Greenberg himself was able to adapt, but also to help D.D. Allen adapt. This editing in this movie is phenomenal. I think that is what keeps its pace really well. And I just want to sprinkle a little bit of devil's advocate, John. Another movie that's nominated there is A Clockwork Orange. Should that have won for best film editing? Just asking, just wondering.
No, The French Connection is amazing. I don't think that chase scene, it wouldn't be the same without the editing. I mean, the visceral nature of the editing, the cutting back and forth from the driving, the train, looking up at the train, looking down at the road, almost hitting someone, like close up of the eye, like all of it constructs this insanely visceral chase scene. I mean, it's why we're talking about this movie, so many years later, because people are still enthralled by this chase scene. People still call it one of the best chase scenes of all time. And, what did we say? An hour and 44 minutes this film is, and it really flies by. It is paced so well. Like you said, there's no scene in this movie that really feels it needs to be cut. It just keeps us going, keeps us moving into this case. I know you like The Clockwork Orange. Say what you got to say if you think it should win.
Walking in the rain. No, I agree. French Connection is a great, beautiful edited film. I'm just floored still that Clockwork Orange is nominated this year for many categories, and it is definitely one of my favorite films. You can check my letterbox. I'm pretty sure it's in my top 4. Anyways, John, let's move on.
Best cinematography went to Fiddler on the Roof by Oswald Morris. This is Morris's only Academy Award win out of a total of 3 nominations, and he was nominated for the 1968 Best Picture winner, Oliver, and The Wiz from 1978. Ben.
Tradition.
So I got to watch Fiddler on the Roof. This is a completely well-deserved win. This is a beautiful, beautiful movie that is just stunning. I mean, I was like really blown away by just how beautiful the cinematography was in this movie. I mean, even from the opening moments, the Fiddler on the Roof, the beautiful sunsets, the beautiful village that they show, that's just so lush and feels so like real yet so fantasy like, you know. I really, really loved not only the movie, but I adored the cinematography. It really did feel like a fairy tale that was brought to life.
So this is a movie that I love. I love this movie, and again, this is the movie I was kind of making mention before of like I'm very excited to also talk about. This movie is a big part of my childhood. I would never have thought when I was watching The French Connection that it would get beaten out by Fiddler on the Roof. Same thing with A Clockwork Orange. Same thing with even The Last Picture Show. Like those are beautifully shot movies, but then Fiddler on the Roof, it's not, you know, it's not like, oh, why is this here? It's a beautifully shot movie. I mean, the amount of angles they got, all the Judaica, all the other religious aspects, and then the village itself, the way it's captured, it's so it is very, very well done, and it's huge. It's like it feels like a huge scale while being so intimate on many different levels. So this is not the last time I'm going to sing some Fiddler on the Roof.
This is a perfect example. The film looks great as it is now, but it's not. There's no 4K version of it. This is a perfect opportunity to bring this film back, restore it, and this movie would look so good in 4K. I just know it would. And it deserves it.
I agree, and I don't want to bring this up. I agree, but I don't want to bring this up, but I feel like this is kind of the appropriate tie-in. Supposedly they're remaking Fiddler on the Roof.
Interesting.
Supposedly in 2020 they started some development on a remake of it. Now, do I want a remake of it? No. I don't know who can perform the role of Thivier.
Well, let's take a guess. And while we're on this topic, I'm curious. I'm just throwing this out there. Don't get offensive. Say this movie is made in 4 years. Would Seth Rogen work? Could he do it? Could he actually do it in a convincing way?
No, absolutely not.
He has to be older.
Do you actually know how old Topol was when he played Rev Tevye?
Well, let me guess. He's younger than I would expect.
Just say a number. I want to hear.
He was 40.
36.
Wow. That's insane. That man looks like he's 56 at least.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Well, we'll get to we'll get to Best Actor. Best Art Direction went to Nicholas and Alexandra. Art Direction to Ernest Archer, John Box, Jack Maxted, and Gil Paranado. And Set Decoration by Vernon Dixon.
Still just thinking about Seth Rogen.
God damn it, no. He could not do If I Was a Rich Man. There's no way he could do that.
You know he could. It would be, I don't think anyone would take it serious because of him being Seth Rogen, but I really think he could.
But that's the problem. That would be the problem, is no one would take it seriously, where this movie is...
It's very serious.
Very serious. It's not trying to be like, let's make fun of Jewish culture. It's like, no, this is Jewish culture, but instead we're gonna kind of do it in our own. The way the comedy of that movie is so unique, and it's so uniquely Jewish, that for Seth Rogen to jump in it would just, like, I know he's very funny, but it would be more mocking than actually celebrating it.
I totally get that. Yeah, totally. It makes me think, though, like with the modern age, how they would try to modernize the film, because the film is very much of the time. It's supposed to be demonstrating what it was like at that time for Jewish people in that location, but how would they, twist things and adjust things?
And the idea of tradition, that, no, we have to live this traditional life, and like, wait a second, I'm being told I don't have to live this traditional life, but it's tradition. But why do we do these things?
Which... in the modern world, I think could be muddled heavily,
Yeah. Could be very muddled heavily.
And could be just a train wreck if done wrong.
Yeah.
Best sound went to
I agree.
Fiddler on the Roof by David Hilliard and Gordon K. McCollum. This is Hilliard's first of 2 Academy Awards and McCollum's first and only Oscar win.
So the movie beats out French Connection, also beats out Diamonds Are Forever, the Bond movie of the year. What do you think? Because sound is always an interesting category. Because I don't know what truly makes best sound, and it seems to never follow the same. Some years you'd be like, oh, they would give best sound obviously for the musical, but then it goes to like the big action movie. So like this year went to the musical, but should have gone to the French Connection because of the sound design in that movie and how sound is so important because there really is not much of a score, or is the big operatic component and composition of Fiddler on the Roof, is like that outweigh it?
I think it does. I mean, Fiddler on the Roof definitely shot at times on scenes, but it feels very much on location in a lot of it, and it feels grand, and it feels like they are in the wilderness of where this would take place at the time. And I just imagine, they get credit for achieving something like that, being able to record sound on location like this, and in a very kind of natural location as well. But then you're right, like the French Connection, it was probably impossible to get real sound from recording locations because it was probably filled with just like car honking, people yelling, screaming. It is challenging because the French Connection relies so much on that sound design and not so much on the actual music itself that's kind of occasionally scattered through. But I don't know, man. This is like a really hard one where I agree with Fiddler on the Roof, but I also kind of agree with the French Connection. I could see how either of those could be a great choice, and I'm not mad that the Fiddler on the Roof won.
Yeah, I think some of the sound effects that go into like Topol's performance, like If I Was a Rich Man, towards the end when he does the big like kind of chanting, and he goes like, and it's like reverberated, like that probably could help its win. I think also when I was rewatching the movie, when we were preparing for this episode, one thing I realized is that there's a lot of big ensemble singing, but really the only people who are singing is Reptevia and Golda, his wife. There's not really many other like solo vocal performances. It's all ensemble. It's all group singing. So I wonder if like that, and the way that it kind of weaves in very perfectly with the movie without you realizing, oh wait, shouldn't there be a ton of other people singing along with us? I think that's what kind of helps the movie itself. So maybe that's why it also won for sound. Moving on to Best Song Original for the Picture. That's the name they decided to call it this year. Went to the theme from Shaft, music and lyrics by Isaac Hayes. This is Hayes' only Academy Award win. So Isaac Hayes told Mojo magazine back in the 90s, in 1995, that as this was my first such undertaking, writing the music and composing it, at the initial meeting I had with the producer and director in New York, you could see the anxiety on their faces. They tested me by giving me the opening scene, footage of Shaft coming out of the subway, to take away and see how I got on. I remembered a guitar line I had in a tune I'd never used, got it off the shelf, and had our guitarist play it exactly the same, but with a wah-wah. I don't know if people know what a wah-wah pedal is, but it's a foot-controlled thing that makes your sound go like wah-wah, like literally a wah-wah. And that is very iconic with the song. And then Hayes go on to say, then I got our drummer to play 16-note sequences on the hi-hat, and we had it. The core rhythm for the tune, the springboard for the whole soundtrack, they had cut in under 2 hours. The following year, the theme from Shaft then would obviously win Best Original Song, with Hayes becoming the first African-American to win that honor or any Academy Award in a non-acting category, as well as the first recipient of the award who both wrote and performed the winning song. So a lot of groundbreaking for Hayes, and again, the fact that theme from Shaft, which is very iconic, was just a 2-hour little, I got to put something together, is quite beautiful to me.
It's incredible. It's amazing. Like, what an iconic song too that we like still kind of reference in pop culture today. It's so sexy, and it's hard not to think of that song without thinking of lust or like being so cool, having like swag and like swagger on you, Awesome. Yeah, exactly. You could just hear like, oh yeah, in the background. It's amazing. I mean, it's great way to introduce our character. I went back and watched the opening of Shaft, and I was like, wow. One, very similar kind of, not aesthetic, but it's a similar opening to Midnight Cowboy, where we have this character and it's playing this iconic song. It's not, it doesn't have a lot of singing or anything in it, but it defines our character. It defines our journey that we're about to take with this character as well.
Black private dick that's a sex machine to all the chicks.
Shaft!
Damn right. Who is the man that would risk his neck for his brother, man?
Shaft!
Can you dig it?
To best scoring adaptation and original song score went to Fiddler on the Roof, adapted by Mr. John Williams. This is John Williams' first Academy Award win out of 5 wins and 53 total nominations. This win is Williams' only win for best scoring adaptation and original song score, as his 4 other Oscars were for best original score. So Ben, as the Fiddler on the Roof lover, I've only seen it once, but tell me, why does John Williams deserve this?
I love that John Williams got this, and the score in the movie is quite beautiful. I mean, it's not his work per se, but again, like the way they adapted for the screen and used is quite beautiful. I feel like when you are able to adapt a Broadway musical for a film, you get a little bit more. There are more instruments you're able to include in the arrangements. There's more sound. There's more that you can build upon because you're able to control it a little bit more versus a live environment, like performing it on a stage. So it's really great. And again, like that note that this is the only time that he won for an adapted score. All of his other music is original. So you can just imagine. And man, I'm not going to say that like Schindler's List directly rips it off, but in Fiddler on the Roof, there's definitely that Judaic sound. It just feels familiar to me. And I don't know if that's the way that prayers are said, or if the way that the Hebrew comes off, and the way the way that it sounds just to my ear, and different words, and the way consonants are brought out. It feels like Schindler's List has some of the Fiddler on the Roof aspects to it to honor that music. So John Williams definitely had some practice before writing that score 20 years later. So very iconic.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you also can't ignore Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in there as well. I mean, what an iconic film,
yeah.
Iconic score. I mean, I also love Bedknobs and Broomsticks, but for me, this is first and foremost Willy Wonka. I mean, I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Every song, even the stupid laundry song, which is definitely the worst song in the movie, with his mom, every song is amazing in that film. It's beautiful. Every song is singable, catchy, just beautiful.
Wait, why is the song with the mom singing the Charlie song? Why is that?
I just think it's the worst song in the whole movie.
Oh.
That's
I
it.
thought maybe
it's
I'm
not
missing
bad.
something.
That really shows how great the soundtrack is, that even the bad song is still the emotional, mother-son song. It's not as inventive visually, and it's not that interesting of a song for me, because the rest is just so vibrant and in your face. And, man, I just love Willy Wonka, and one day we'll record a whole episode on it.
Yeah, so what I'm interested by is that it was put into the adapted score category where, what was this based off of? I guess because it's based off of a book, but
it's either that
book, or
I just don't know enough about Willy Wonka. Maybe it was established as a play first and foremost, like a musical maybe, but from my knowledge and history of it, I've never heard of that. I know it's been since made into musicals, but I've never heard of it being a musical before the actual musical motion picture.
It doesn't look like it was. So that's just the weird stuff, because maybe if it was put into original score, maybe it could have won. I don't know. I mean, I would have to listen to the Summer of 42, which we'll get to next. But I think just the importance that John Williams got at Fiddler on the Roof gets, recognized this year for song, and score is great, because a lot of our favorite musical adaptations don't get to win this category because it is an adaptation. So very cool that it was added. Moving on to Best Original Dramatic Score, that one went to Summer of 42 to Michel Legrand. This is Legrand's second Oscar win after previously winning for Best Original Song for The Windmills of Your Mind from the Thomas Crown Affair from 1968.
Best Animated Short Subject went to The Crunch Bird from Ted Potok.
Best Live Action Short Subject went to Sentinels of Silence to Robert Amram and Manuel Arango.
Best Documentary Short Subject went to Sentinels of Silence, Robert Amaram and Manuel Arango. What?
Yeah,
What?
I mean, good for that. I mean, it's definitely it's happened. I mean, we had a few years ago with Flea when it was documentary feature, animated feature, and international feature. So, sure, a live action short and documentary short. Sure.
Imagine just being one of those other people in the documentary category, and they're like, "What the hell? Like, they already won. What the hell?"
Damn, now I feel like I should watch it. We should watch it.
It better be that good, right?
Well, should we watch it? How long is this? Is it right now? Can we watch it? Sentinels of Silence. 1971 film. It is 18 minutes, John.
Oh, all right. 18 minutes of a watch along. Let's go.
All right, we watched along, and moving along to Best Documentary Feature went to The Hellstrom Chronicle to Wallen Green.
Best Costume Design went to Nicholas and Alexandra by Yvonne Blake and Antonio Castillo.
Best Foreign Language Film went to The Garden of Finzi Cantinis to Italy and to director Vittorio De Sica.
Best Screenplay based on material from another medium went to The French Connection by Ernest Tiedemann based on the book by Robin Moore. The French Connection is an adaptation of Robin Moore's book of the same name, which dealt with the true story of NYPD detectives Eddie Egan and Sonny Grasso, the cops who broke up a notorious drug operation and confiscated 32 million pounds worth of heroin. The two of them agreed to serve as technical advisors for the movie, which the screenplay itself, penned by Ernest Tiedemann, experienced changes in the course of filming in favor of phrases suggested by Egan and Grosso, whose rich experience on the force contributed to the dominating sense of realism in the film.
Man, this is a very interesting breakdown because, again, this is like what makes a best screenplay? Because the other nominees, we also have A Clockwork Orange and like Last Picture Show in there, and those are two really strong scripts and stories. I can understand maybe not A Clockwork Orange, but it's very good adaptation of the book, and a lot of people point to that ending and the ambiguity of the ending of the movie versus the book, and why that choice was made. So I don't know. I definitely am not upset the French Connection won. It's a really strong year, so I just wonder if there is a little bit of room for argument. Also, the Last Picture Show, maybe, that there's some really great quotes in that, and I think that's what helps the two supporting performances that we'll talk about that go on to win. I think it really is helped by the screenplay. So I don't know, John, any thoughts? Are you cool with it? Would you pick differently?
I thought it was really interesting, Friedkin talking about this film and how the two detectives that we reference here said it's about 90% accurate in terms of, this whole film takes place over I shouldn't say the film, but the true story takes place over 10 months. And they were able to kind of condense and create a film that is very engaging, fast-paced, and still gets the entire story very clearly of the case. So I think it's very well deserved. I think I look at films like The Last Picture Show and A Clockwork Orange, and those both seem like daunting undertakings because they're such large. They're larger films than The French Connection. The French Connection is more narrowed down and tighter, and it's about mainly these two characters, mainly really just our one main character. While The Last Picture Show and Clockwork Orange, they have so many more characters. It's much more complex plot. There's just a lot more going on. So maybe there's some credit to be kind of given there because it's a little more complicated, but I think it's very hard to take something that is based on a true story, especially in crime, and make it not only very compelling, but so compelling that, it became such a phenomenal film for the year and went on to have a sequel made.
Best story and screenplay based on factual material or material not previously produced or published, which is the longest way of just saying best original screenplay, went to The Hospital to Paddy Chayefsky. Paddy Chayefsky previously won in 1955 for Marty for Best Adapted Screenplay and would go on to win for Network in 1976. So 3 Academy Awards to Chayefsky.
Best Supporting Actress went to Cloris Leachman for The Last Picture Show as Ruth Popper. This is Leachman's only Academy Award win and nomination, and Leachman won many accolades, including 8 Primetime Emmy Awards from 22 nominations, making her the most nominated, along with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, the most awarded performer in Emmy history. She won an Academy Award, a BAFTA, a Golden Globe Award, and an Emmy.
So I really love this performance by Cloris Leachman. It's so funny because my first introduction, I think, to Cloris Leachman, like, that I recognized her as the actress was in Beer Fest. She plays the grandmother in that movie, and that was, like, so bizarre to then see her in other stuff and other productions, because that role is so funny. And it's just like they do some really funny bits with her.
Wow, I had no idea. That's insane.
Right?
You blew my mind. What?
But then in this performance in The Last Picture Show, there's something so it's one of the darker parts of the movie that is not so direct. It's very indirect with what the subject matter is, and the subject matter, on the surface, it's about our main guy falling in love with this older woman because he was helping drive her around because the coach was asking him to do that. What we come to then find out, and the subtext of it is she's going to therapy and she's depressed. She's anxiety. There's some like mental, just like something mentally going on with her. I won't call it an illness because I feel like that is what was like painted on her by her husband in the movie, by like this stigmatism about like mental health and awareness and talking about depression and anxiety. And so the fact that that's part of this movie, one, that when it's first introduced is really it's so haunting and it's so gut wrenching because she brings such a great performance and weight to the movie, and that key scene when it starts to kind of realize, oh, she's there for depression, and then the movie falls out. She like really comes like into herself, and then the ending is all about how she's made to feel by the end of it, but that she's accepting of it, and it's like this big come around moment, and about what this movie really is like human connection and bonds, and how that is interwoven, and how those bonds are tested in life by normal situations in life. And I just really love the movie, but I really loved her performance, so very well deserved. I was very, very pleased with the performance and the win. Moving on to Best Supporting Actor, that one went to Ben Johnson for The Last Picture Show as Sam the Lion. This is Johnson's first Oscar nomination and win. Johnson was an American film and television actor, stuntman, and world champion rodeo cowboy. Tall and the strong silent type, Johnson brought authenticity to many roles in westerns with his droll manner and expert horsemanship. This is a stacked supporting actor category. You also have Jeff Bridges, also from The Last Picture Show, Leonard Frey from Fiddler on the Roof as Modal, and Roy Scheider in French Connection as we talked about with Buddy Russo. Just all around like some really strong performances, and for Ben Johnson to get this, again, I was very pleased, and I thought he was very strong in the movie, especially that scene where he's talking to the boys before they go to Mexico and gives them lines, and also when they confronts them about what they did to Billy. Just commanding performance, and very much you can tell in that Western style of acting in terms of bringing cowboys to life. John, I know The Last Picture Show wasn't your favorite movie, but what do you think about the two supporting performances, and if you feel like they're deserved or not? I know Roy Scheider being there, like that feels like, oh man, why didn't that one win? But what are your thoughts on it?
Honestly, I think Roy Scheider is a weird choice. I mean, I think he's great in French Connection. He's an important element, but I just don't think he's integral enough and has even enough like oomph to his performance to even be nominated here. Not that there's anything wrong with the performance. I just think, there's probably someone else we could have squeezed in here instead. But Ben Johnson does give a great performance. It's funny that the film is kind of really attached to these supporting actors. It's kind of like the difference between I don't want to say the elderly, but the middle-aged versus kind of the new youth, this weird coming-of-age film. And I don't think the film really works without those kind of anchors that kind of teach these kids or teach them a lesson or try to educate them, even though they are just as flawed, if not more flawed, than the kids themselves. It is an interesting film, and I think it's something that I would appreciate a little bit more maybe if I watched it, a second time. I think there's a lot going on in that film, and it just feels so different, too, compared to the other films that we have this year. But no, well-deserved for Ben Johnson and Cloris Leachman. Best Actress went to Jane Fonda for Clute as Bree Daniels. This is Jane Fonda's second nomination, but her first win, and she would go on to be nominated an additional 5 times and even win Best Actress again in 1980 for Coming Home. Jane Fonda is an American actress and political activist who first gained fame in comedic roles but later established herself as a serious actress. While she's the daughter of actor Henry Fonda, Jane separated herself by choosing daring and challenging roles like her performance as a sex worker in Clute. Fonda's outspoken anti-establishment and anti-war activities during the Vietnam War caused tension in Hollywood, but her performances still stand on their own today. So, Ben, first, I want to ask if you've seen Clute before, and also, what do you think of Jane Fonda? I think it's so funny that we're in this kind of period now where we still have these actors. I mean, we have Jeff Bridges, we have Jane Fonda. They are both in, modern films today. Jane Fonda was just, in a film very recently, about a month ago. And she's the lead actress, I think, in that film as well. So it's getting really fascinating that we're getting to this period of Oscar history where we can see some of these actors and actresses today still on screen, still in multiplexes.
Yeah, so I've not gone to see Clute, but it was one of the movies I was trying to get to for this episode. So for those who don't know, Clute, neo-noir movie, bit of a thriller. It was directed by and produced by Alan J. Pakula, and Pakula, this is actually part of what is deemed his Paranoia trilogy, which was, so this is the first one. It's followed by The Parallax View in 1974, and then All the President's Men, which I have seen from 1976. So I thought that was really interesting that this movie has a connection, which is why I also wanted to watch it. Also, Roy Scheider is in it. Donald Sutherland is in it. So I was very interested in watching it, and obviously I want to see Jane Fonda, and she's an incredible actress. She's been able to have kind of this revived career because of like a show like Grace and Frankie. She's still beautiful, in her 80s. So I love Jane Fonda and everything she stands for. Best Actor went to Gene Hackman for The French Connection as Detective Jimmy Popeye Doyle. This is Hackman's first of 2 Academy Awards. He would go on to win for Best Supporting Actor in the 1992 Best Picture winner Unforgiven, and he has been nominated a total of 5 times. William Friedkin stated in the BBC documentary that he had never read Moore's book that the film was based off of and disapproved of the casting of Gene Hackman. Various modern interviews of Friedkin, Hackman, and Grosso, Sonny Grosso revealed that the filmmakers considered Robert Mitchum, Peter Boyle, Jackie Gleason, Eddie Egan himself, and popular New York columnist Jimmy Breslin to play the role of Popeye. Breslin was briefly hired, but Friedkin said in the documentary that he was fired because his acting was below par and he could not drive. Gene Hackman spent a month patrolling the New York streets with Eddie Egan so he can get closer to the character's spirit. Hackman was also adamantly against using the N-word on screen, but Friedkin convinced him Eddie and the policeman at the time would not hold back on offensive language, which I guess Disney deemed inappropriate as they edited it out. So I want to talk about Best Actor for this year. I, as we touched on before, a big fan of Fiddler on the Roof, but I'm also a huge fan of A Clockwork Orange to the extent that I think that Malcolm McDowell's performance in A Clockwork Orange is one of the better performances I've ever seen. There is a command and a villainy that he brings to that role in just a stare. There is a huge weight that he brings to this character that is borderline insane in many ways, and it works so well. It's one of my favorite performances in a movie, and I don't think that we would have a performance like Heath Ledger's Joker without a movie like Clockwork Orange, without Malcolm McDowell's performance. There's a lot I think you can extrapolate right there. And really any villain that comes after, I think, takes a little bit of inspiration from it. So he was not nominated for this. So that's one person that I've always felt like should have been nominated at least and should have won. But also, we have Chaim Topol, who played Tevier in Fiddler on the Roof, and I can't say nothing but glorious things about Chaim Topol in this movie. As a kid, I used to sing "If I Was a Rich Man," like I used to sing it all the time and do that like accent and the hand movements, the gestures, the way he adapted a philosophy and outlook on life of, well, why do we do these things that are traditional? I don't know, but we do them anyways. Like that, the breadth of the character and the weight of it is so real. And as you know, we were talking about before, I asked you to guess the age of Chaim Topol at the time. He was 36 when he made the movie, and he looked way older. He looked like this much older Jewish man, and that, I know it's makeup, but still, that's some of the acting that makes you believe it. That makes it seem real and authentic. It's pretty wild. So I like Gene Hackman's performance, but I feel like I can present two stronger cases for an Oscar win. John, I just want to get your thoughts on that. I'm not saying to pick, maybe Malcolm McDowell, but Chaim Topol, I mean, man, that performance is quite good.
It's incredible. I mean, he really does create such a vivid character, this haunted father who's, stuck with dealing with how to understand these traditions, whether to continue them or not, even though they're so ingrained in his soul. But even his relationship with his wife, that earnest feeling that you get from the two of them, that they were put together in an arranged marriage, but they've come to love each other, and they really establish that relationship together, and it's really anchored by his performance and the weight that he carries throughout the film. I think it's an incredible performance. I think you're exactly correct in that state. But I mean, so is Gene Hackman's performance in The French Connection. But I'm gonna go with someone who's not even nominated here, and it's another Gene. The Gene that I think should have at least been nominated is Gene Wilder for Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And he is phenomenal. I mean, the movie doesn't work without him. He is the core and the linchpin of this movie, and it's just incredible. I mean, it's still a film that we talk about today. It's a performance that we talk about today. People still spoof and replicate aspects of his performance in characters today, and it's kind of insane to me that we've kind of looked past this film. That in terms of this year, they looked past this film and didn't really give it much credit. I mean, we got the nomination for the score there, but this film deserves so much more than it did, and it's probably because people didn't really realize what it was. Almost, it almost kind of reminds me of The Wizard of Oz, almost, where it was not fully appreciated until years passed, where people were no, this is one of the defining musicals of the generation, and it just happened to come maybe a little later than what people expected. But yeah, what an amazing performance from Gene Wilder. But at the same time, I don't think Gene Hackman doesn't deserve this. He is incredible in this movie, and he's so vicious and mean, and especially when you've seen Gene Hackman outside of his films and in interviews and on round tables, he seems like a very genuine, nice guy who is funny. He's very goofy, and he doesn't seem at all like this character of Popeye. So again, shows the amazing performance that he's given, and all the way cutting to the future of 1922, where he wins for the supporting actor for Unforgiven. I mean, the man's got range. He is so good as a villain, so good as a protagonist, so good as a mixture of both. It's very well deserved. But yeah, you're exactly right. It is a stacked, crazy year.
Yeah, it definitely. And I'm not trying to say that Gene Hackman doesn't deserve it. I look at some of the other performances, and Gene Wilder is another good one that could have been there. Of just man, what makes the best actor? And I'm always asking that question, what makes the best the best? And I feel like with actor, man, Chaim Topol really does command that screen, and there's so much comedy there. There's a wisdom within the character. I mean, yes, the character he's bringing to life. So I just wonder, maybe they got it wrong, maybe they didn't. I don't know. If you were to vote, would you write in Gene Wilder, or would you pick Gene Hackman?
I would go with Wilder. I just love the
What would
movie
you
too
pick?
much to my core. It's hard not to. I mean, I grew up just like idolizing that man, even though he wasn't real, didn't exist. You know, Gene Wilder for me for the longest time was just Willy Wonka in my head. You know, it didn't matter how many times I've seen Blazing Saddles or Young Frankenstein. He was always Willy Wonka, and still to this day, I don't care who else will play him. It's always going to be Gene Wilder.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably just go behind Topol because I kind of like want to secretly keep like Alex DeLarge, just like, yeah, we know how great you are. We're gonna keep you on the side because you're just so good that we don't need to award you for it. But I being a little facetious about that. I don't know. I still would pick Chaim Topol over Gene Hackman, and that's not trying to diss anything about Gene Hackman. It's just two different ways of commanding the screen and how different they can be and how effectively they can work.
Best Director went to William Friedkin for The French Connection. This is Friedkin's only Academy Award, but he would go on to be nominated for Best Director for The Exorcist in 1974. Director William Friedkin later admitted in his biography that he had almost didn't make it to the Oscar ceremony where he won the Best Director Academy Award. His car broke down at a gas station, so he asked the first person he saw permission to borrow his car. The man initially refused because he was supposed to take his wife on a date that evening, but he relented after Friedkin offered him $200. The man's only other condition was that Friedkin call the wife in order for him to explain why the date was called off. After winning the Oscar, the man waived his right to the money, only asking Friedkin to call and explain the situation to the man's wife, which of course Friedkin did. So not only is that just such an adorable, hilarious little story about, you know, the access to get to Hollywood, the struggle that like sometimes even the winner of Best Director can sometimes, you know, have issues trying to get to the location, trying to get to the Academy Awards. It's something that you wouldn't really expect, especially for someone who would go on later to win Best Director. And how funny is it that he has this happen to him in the same way like Popeye stealing that pedestrian's car in the chase scene, you know? Friedkin's just kicked down, he's like, police, 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 and steals it, but he's just trying to get to the Academy Awards. That's it.
I think it's a great story, and you're right, it does fit thematically with the movie. And we talked glowingly about Friedkin. I think we both fell in love watching him talk about the movie and just watching the movie and bringing it down at an intimate level. Like, I really do appreciate Friedkin's work more than I thought I would with the movie. And again, just because it's a very stacked year. Stanley Kubrick for Clockwork Orange, Norman Jewison for Fiddler on the Roof, Peter Bogdanovich for The Last Picture Show, even John Schlesinger, who won for Midnight Cowboy, His Study Bloody Sunday. Here, you know, again, like it's so interesting because such different styles of filmmaking, and that's why I kind of asked that question earlier, and maybe we can break it down more when we talk about Best Picture in a second, about like stylistically and the violence in movies and like how French Connection set up and paved the way for other movies. But like, let's say Norman Jewison won. Let's just say he won for Fiddler on the Roof. Like, I wonder if the landscape of films would look different. I mean, even Peter Bogdanovich for The Last Picture Show, that movie is so well crafted, and like I feel like when I watched that movie was like a, again, I said Linklater, I think, to you on the side, but it did remind me of Boyhood in some aspects of it. So I wonder, just like, man, like does Friedkin deserves this? Like, it, not that he doesn't deserve it. Do the other ones deserve it more? Like, especially like a guy like Kubrick, who I feel like we can study like him as just like its own masterclass. Just watch those movies over and over again. You'll learn how to direct properly. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, one, we just got such an insider look into the process making this film because of that Academy interview. So obviously, thanks to them, Chris McQuarrie did a great job kind of asking really interesting and compelling questions. But also, we just got this director who's so open. He's honest. He seems to be so willing to discuss his process, discuss what it was like, but also admit his faults. Like we talked about early on, he was kind of insane when it came to his directing style, the way he pushed his crew members, the way he pushed his actors in order to get these performances. But at the end of the day, look at what he did. He created such a lived-in real world that it felt worth it at the end of the day. I loved in his interview where he talked about, you know, we only had one permit, it was the Metro, and we did all these crazy things, and looking back on it, like, he described how he would never do this again. He would never make a film in this way, But in a sense, that's what makes The French Connection so wonderful. It's like this weird specific moment in time that has still remained timeless. It's worked out in a way where you can watch this film and it still feels like the beats that we are used to for cop dramas and detective thrillers. And it's because he's kind of helped define what that is in The French Connection, and he's combined so many different styles that he's helped usher in and establish what we know as like 70s auteur cinema. It's amazing. It's really incredible. But really, it just comes down to how much I love how open he is, how there's so many incredible interviews, and I think the more we go now in Worthy, the more we're going to get more in depth, because we just have more access to documentation. We have more access to the interviews. The people are going to be still alive. You know, the interview that he held was only back in 2016, where, you know, Friedkin looked like in good health. He looked like he's doing pretty well. He looked like he can even go out and direct another film if he wanted. So what an amazing director that I've kind of like unlocked and discovered. I've seen The Exorcist, obviously, and I love some of his other films, but it really made me kind of inspired to go and kind of pursue and watch every film that he's ever made.
And finally, Best Picture nominees are Nicholas and Alexandra, The Last Picture Show, Fiddler on the Roof, A Clockwork Orange, and our winner of the Best Picture Award of 1971, The French Connection. John, before we get into if it's worthy, if it's not worthy, let me just give some stats and figures to kind of see what everyone else thinks. So The French Connection has a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average rating of 8.75. The top critics percentage is a 92 with the average rating of a 9.4. Audience score is an 87 with an average, and this is out of 5, 4.09. IMDb has it as a 7.7. Metacritic has it as a 94. Which is the highest we've had since My Fair Lady, which was a 95. So take that for what it will for that. And the movie won a total of 5 Oscars out of 8 nominations. John, what did you give The French Connection?
I gave The French Connection an 84, which, you know, we just gushed. We've talked a lot about this movie. That sounds like it would be too low, but to me, I kind of hinted, and we talked about the ending. It felt a little hollow to me. I wish there's a little bit more, but an 84 is still a great film to me. It's a good film. You know, anything around there, we have West Side Story from 1961, which I rated an 82. Let's see, American in Paris is an 80, so both of those are lower than how I feel about The French Connection. And then anything a little bit higher, we have maybe like Casablanca, which is an 88. So I still regard The French Connection as a great film. It's just missing a little more of the elements. I wish we got a little more of the relationship between these two detectives. We went a little bit deeper. I understand that's kind of it's the essence of this movie, is the obsession, the drive to keep kind of pursuing these criminals, but at the same time, that's always going to have like a hand. It's going to have a level of distance that it puts the viewer where you won't be able to kind of fully dive deep into these characters, but you get to see a very interesting, realistic depiction of this world in New York City at the time and the crime world. So I absolutely adored the film. But Ben, what did you give The French Connection?
I gave The French Connection an 85. So again, yeah, it's like, what? We just gushed about this. This is a long-ass podcast. How come I've listened to this for so long and you're only giving this movie an 85? I think this movie has a lot of strong aspects to it. I think the points I'm taking it off of, and I feel like the ending is, I don't love the ending. I think they could have cleaned it up better. I do agree that the whole relationship between Popeye and Buddy Russo, like there could have been more to that. There could have been more to those, but it really is just about the chase, which I think is fine, and people love those kinds of movies. Like that is definitely a valid movie to love, but that doesn't mean that it's like the best thing that it's ever made. And I saved this quote for the end to talk about the rating, and it's a very fair criticism, I think, of the movie, and it's not. I'll just read it. So it's from Pauline Kael of The New Yorker. You know, she was negative about it, and she wrote, "It's not what I want. It's not what I want, not because it fails," and she put in parentheses, "it doesn't fail, but because of what it is. It is, I think, what we once feared mass entertainment might become, jolts for jocks. There's nothing in the movie that you enjoy thinking about afterward. Nothing especially clever except the timing of the subway door and umbrella sequence. Every other effect of the movie, even the climactic car versus runaway elevated train chase, is achieved by noise, speed, and brutality. Now, I'm not saying like all of that is right, but she makes some really great points. I don't think this movie, though, is jolts for jocks, but I do think this movie achieves its success based off noise, speed, and brutality, and that's what makes it a fun movie, engaging. There's a lot of pow and action and this and that. But then does that mean that I now have to give it such high scores? Maybe it just isn't necessarily for me, and I thought maybe the other aspects to it, what it lacked and what could have made it better, if it wasn't so just like bam, pow, let's do this run and gun type of shooting. Let's shoot this car sequence without, actual permits in the city. Let's just like run and gun and kind of do it on our own. That's all great and that's fun, and the spirit of that filmmaking I think is a lot of fun. But I guess maybe it didn't hit the lengths of what you suppose. But then also the score is what I also gave to West Side Story and Ben-Hur, which are huge epics that I thought hit on so many different aspects, but just didn't have that extra oomph that brings it to some higher successes, comparatively to it. So it's weird scores. It's interesting that we both came to that score and we didn't really talk about that beforehand. So and just how it is sometimes we do think on the same wavelengths. But your average rating right now through 44 movies is a 74.0, and I'm at a 76.6. So still in that 70s range. I think to some awful movies beforehand, not The French Connection though. So John, let me ask you that question. Is The French Connection worthy of the Best Picture Award of 1971?
Yes, I do, and it's a mixture of things. I think it's an amazing film for the time. It's so inventive, and it explores such a new way of kind of integrating these different genres and styles of filmmaking into creating something that is still very cohesive and feels so intense. I definitely think this is one of the most intense, if not most visceral, Best Picture winners we've seen yet. And I love that you brought in that quote from the critic, because it is true to a sense. I don't believe it's as offensive as it was to her. I think to me that sounds like an American critic who's just not quite ready to handle French New Wave cinema and wants, maybe the old classic Hollywood to kind of remain the way it was. But that is what makes this film also so incredible, is that they were able to make something, and everything is cinema. And when you look at something like that, it's inspiring to see these group of filmmakers, especially this young guy who didn't have too much under his belt, go out of his way and craft something with this much energy. Sometimes you make a film and maybe the story doesn't always hit. There's like issues with the screenplay, but you can just feel the energy. You can feel the passion behind the camera. You can feel the thrust and the constant push to be like, we have to make this. We have to make every single shot as interesting and compelling and just keep pushing and pushing. And I get that. I feel that from this movie 100%. And I think that carries it a long way, and it carries it past those flaws because of that level of visceral filmmaking that we get out of this, that intensity. So absolutely, I do think it's worthy. But Ben, do you agree? Do you disagree?
I think it's worthy. And I think that this is just another one of those really strong years where a lot of films are worthy. Now, I always preface this by saying what I voted for, I don't know. But let me just say a few positives about The French Connection. That thrill, the chase, I'm going to do whatever it takes to figure this out and accomplish this is why I love the movie. I think it has that thriller tenacity to it that is so much fun, and it's fun to sit in a theater and watch it. I'm so happy I got the chance to see this movie in a theater, to have that experience, to see it on a bigger screen, to not just watch it on my TV, my laptop, my iPad, whatever, because it gave a bigger and grander experience I think it deserves, and that pretty much all movies deserve. It's a lot of fun. I think Hackman's character is great. He commands the scenes. Again, the cat and mouse aspect, the Tom and Jerry aspect of this movie is why it's so much fun. It's so compelling. The car chase sequences keeps you on the edge of your seat. Your heart is constantly pacing, and just the behind the scenes aspect is a lot of fun. There's a lot of there's a lot of fun that and a lot of insight that I got from researching this movie, from seeing where it was filmed in the area that I live in, to hear Friedkin's words. It was very inspirational and very, I see the art, and that's why the whole cold open and us talking about the edit, it seeing it gets taken out, is so disheartening because of the effort that got put in this movie. It's like, why would you take this out when there's so much effort, there's so much praise that this movie then got? Like, it's very undeserved to have that edit to it. Now, what would I vote for? I mean, I love all the nominees, and it's now going to come out of left field because I was so praising of A Clockwork Orange and Fiddler on the Roof. I think I would have picked The Last Picture Show to win Best Picture for this year. To me, that screams best. I know you think that it's insane, and I'm glad that you think it's insane. I've always held just a conviction and a feeling that a movie like that, the movie that I think that directly, I know I mentioned Boyhood, but I say more modern. When Boyhood is modern, it's just almost 10 years old, which makes me feel old in and of itself there. The movie I think that it's very similar to is The Fabelmans. I think The Fabelmans and Last Picture Show share some very similar threads. It's not an exact story. It's different places in the world, but there's something there that I think Spielberg might have been trying to tap into, that might have taken some inspiration from. Maybe that's just how I see it, but I really love that movie. I really love the style. I think that it would have been really interesting to see a movie that was based off old 50s movies, essentially, but what had like modern takes, modern storylines, went out there with what I was trying to talk about and show. Would have been really interesting for its time. But then, as I've also proposed in theory, that The French Connection might have paved the way for the next movie we're going to talk about, The Godfather, in our next episode, paved the way for that and its sequel, Part 2, to win Best Picture, because those are gritty films. If a movie like The Last Picture Show had won, I don't know. Maybe it would have been different. Maybe there wouldn't have been the precedent that was set. That's me just thinking and pontificating and what I would have done. But I do not want to take anything away from The French Connection, because I still think that was worthy of winning its award. So I loved it. I'm really happy in this discussion. I think sometimes I go into these episodes, John, and I'm always like, what am I going to say? Because sometimes it is very off the cuff. It's reactionary to what you're saying. We're both looking at the same info, how we both taking it in, and I had a lot of fun. And then, again, the other movies we have to talk about, I think, really helped it. So, any final thoughts on The French Connection, the 44th Academy Awards, the year of 1971?
It has been a great episode. I can't believe that it's been as long as we've talked. I mean, and I feel like I still have gas in the tank. I feel like there's more to talk about, which is so interesting because I think the behind the scenes was just as fascinating as the actual product that was made. And I think that's kind of how we got into this point. Plus, we have the special element of the fact that we got to see this together. I mean, we haven't watched the film together that we've done this podcast for in such a long time. In fact, I've scrolled back and I'm like, I don't really remember even, honestly, what was the last thing that we've watched specifically together. So now here we are. Not only did we get to watch it together, we got to go to a theater, and we got to go to New York City, like a beautiful theater called the Film Forum in Manhattan, and we got to watch this together in a sold-out theater. It was jam-packed, and I don't think you can get that kind of experience very often, and especially in the city, the same location that the film takes place, and have it be as bombastic of a crowd. The car chase scene, people were like doing oohs and ahs and like having jumping up in their seat. Like, it was a really great experience, and I definitely will never forget it. And this is special. I think this is like this weird marker for me, because I remember when I first looked at this crackhead Excel sheet that you've made of all of we call it the best picture list, and it's insane. If you look at it, it's like a madman. It's so well organized, but it has so much information on it. And I remember looking at the whole list of movies because it was really easy to simply see them all listed here. And I remember looking and being like, man, it's not going to be until 1972 where The Godfather, where it'll be way more coherent for me, because I just feel like at our age, that's as far back as I've really gotten myself looking into cinema, looking into film history. Before, obviously, I got into college and saw a lot of older films. But this is really amazing. I can't believe we've gotten to this point, and we're moving forward now to such a more familiar kind of areas of film. Not only just like the years, but just films that I've seen maybe before. So it's gonna start to change the way this like podcast will go, and I can't wait, buddy. It's been a great time.
Yeah, I can't wait either. I agree. It's super weird, to look back, and because I remember too when I first looked at the list, I'm like, okay, there's The Godfather. Oh, and there's all this before The Godfather. There's a lot of movies, but it's a very rewarding, I think, experience and journey. And I'm glad that we're doing this together, and I'm glad that you're right. We got to see The French Connection together, and I'm very excited to talk about The Godfather with you. Which, who knows? I mean, do we aim for another two-parter, John? I'm gonna put it right on you. You looked so scared when I just said two-parter.
Because then it's
right
like,
there.
damn, you got to do a two-parter for the second as well. I mean, oof. But I'm down. I'm also down for a meaty episode because it is The Godfather. It's a meaty film.
A horse meaty episode. Anyways, I feel like we should end. We always, whenever it's a musical, I'd love to sing some Fiddler on the Roof with you right now, but I feel like we should do some French Connection line.
No, take it away. I'm John.
And I'm Ben. And this is Worthy. Tradition!
Tradition, of course.
Tradition! Now, the best is, if I was a rich man, find me a man, match me a man. Matchmaker, make me a match.
All right, shut up there. Shut up! Anybody want a milkshake?
Thanks for listening to Worthy, the breakdown of every Best Picture winner from past to present. Listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on Instagram at Worthy Podcast, on Twitter at Worthy Pod, and on Facebook at Worthy Podcast. Any inquiries can be submitted to worthysubmissions@gmail.com. That's worthysubmissions@gmail.com.